Robservations with Robert, Meyer, Burnett.
Well, greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your archbishop of Banterbury, your chancellor of cheerfulness, your evangelist of the imagination, and your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett. I still don't even know what that means, but it just sounded good when John Campea hung that on me. I am once again your host, like Mr. Rourke was. This is Robservations, episode number 626. Robservations is, of course, the show about something, and it is coming to you. It is being robcasted at you Imagination Connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. You know, being an imagination connoisseur these days, as I'm always talking about what a wealth of riches, even during a pandemic. There's a wealth of riches coming our way. We had a lot of great streaming shows in 2020. Of course, we had things like The Queen's Gambit. You had a new season of The Expanse, another season of The Boys. There was always something to watch, and we were there for it, because where else were we going to go? But anyway, I think one of the most exciting things that has happened, at least in terms of fandom, being an imagination connoisseur, all of it, was the actual realization of the dream of ZACK SNYDER'S cut of Justice League. Now, I frequently was accused of not being an ally to those that wanted to believe that this cut of Justice League, ZACK SNYDER'S cut of Justice League, existed. Now, I always maintained, my position has always been, of course, there was a cut of Justice League, as there is a cut of every movie that ever gets made. They start editing movies on day 2, on normal films, on effects-laden films that require many thousands of special effects. They usually start editing a movie even before principal photography begins, because they have animatics. And they're starting to cut together. Maybe the film editor is doing this. Maybe someone else, an assistant editor, is. But there's now editorial being done even before a movie's shot, especially on large-scale effects films. So the idea that Zack Snyder shot Justice League and he was months into post, of course he had a cut of the movie. As a matter of fact, you could probably watch a pretty decent cut of the movie. But there was, I think, this idea that by saying you had a cut of the film, a lot of people interpreted that to mean, well, there's a cut of the movie that can soon be released, or whatever. We've talked about this over and over and over and over again. I've been accused of not being an ally, but then, because I work in the entertainment business as an editor and post supervisor myself, so I know what that means and where they are in that process. For whatever happens, there's always been all this disinformation. Somebody saw it, somebody didn't see it, there isn't. First of all, to be clear, there was always a cut of the film. As Zach himself has said, multiple cuts of the movie. I've said myself, Tango Shalom, the film that I've recently completed as a producer and the editor and the post supervisor and the visual effects supervisor. Yes, it's a small film, but I filled all 3 of those roles, so I'm very aware of how post works. That said, by the way, if you live in the North Carolina area, it is at the Charlotte Jewish International Film Festival this week, so you can see Tango Shalom and tell me how I did if you live in that area. But anyway, so this debate over the Snyder Cut really was fascinating to me, everyone's take on it. Ultimately, my takeaway was, because the Joss Whedon, the Justice League version of the film was the one finished, I was dubious as to whether the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League would ever see the light of day, even though he had a history with Warner Brothers having multiple cuts of his films. The 3 different cuts of Watchmen, the 2 different cuts of Batman v Superman. So there's even cuts of 2 cuts of Dawn of the Dead, is Dawn of the Dead. So for me, as a post supervisor and an editor and a producer myself, I'm like, okay, the only way that there's ever going to be a Snyder cut of Justice League is if somebody paid for it. And as I postulated on November of 2019 on this show, I said, HBO Max is the first time I ever thought that the Snyder Cut might ever get finished, because they could pony up the cash to finish it. But also I understood that there were actors that didn't appear in Justice League, so there was contracts that had to be signed. There was all kinds of talent issues that had to be solved, because it would be an interesting thing. Would it be a different movie? It is a different movie. That's why it's officially titled ZACK SNYDER'S Justice League. And by the way, Zack Snyder did not get paid to do this version of Justice League. He was doing it because he wanted to, let's say, set the record straight. Anyway, all of these things have been speculated about, talked about. They've burned up the internet for the last 3 years. Today, Vanity Fair magazine dropped what I think is the definitive story of the Snyder Cut of Justice League, which I think is pretty amazing. Here is a photograph from this story. I mean, if that isn't one of the great behind-the-scenes photos of making a film, man, I don't know what is. If they ever make one of those great, like, Titan books, when they publish the making of books that I love so much, can you imagine the kind of pictures? And a lot of the time, Zack Snyder himself takes pictures on set. Here's a picture he took, I presume, from the reshoots for Zack Snyder's Justice League of Ben Affleck. This is a photograph that Zack Snyder himself took. And clearly, Zack Snyder has a phenomenal eye. What a great photograph that is. Really cool stuff. Here's a picture of Mara, of Amber Heard, that he took as well, presumably from the recent reshoots. As has been reported, there's 4 minutes, only 4 minutes of new stuff, scenes that they reshot that were not shot during principal photography. Anyway, thanks to our friends at Vanity Fair, and I've always loved Vanity Fair's coverage of Hollywood, we get a look into the Snyder Cut that I think is very much worth all of our time to go through together. I love the Hollywood issue of Vanity Fair. I look forward to it every year. This is from the Hollywood 2021 article, and I've always loved Vanity Fair's coverage of the industry. So I'll probably go through this entire article. I know some people criticize me like, Rob, why do you just read articles? Tell us to read the articles. Well, I like reading the articles. I have fun doing it. And so we'll see. This article is by Anthony Bresnikan, and this was published today, February 22nd, 2021. From, again, Vanity Fair's Hollywood 2021 magazine, Justice League, the shocking, exhilarating, heartbreaking true story of hashtag the Snyder Cut. Zack Snyder, the director of Justice League, has never seen Justice League. His name is in the credits as the filmmaker, but he's never sat through the version released to the world 3 years ago. His wife, Deborah, who produced the movie, advised him not to. In late 2017, months after the couple cut ties with the superheroic epic amid an increasingly demoralizing battle with Warner Brothers, Deborah Snyder sat in a screening room on the studio lot alongside Christopher Nolan, one of the movie's executive producers, as well as the director of the Dark Knight trilogy. She braced herself as the lights went down. It was just a weird experience, she says now. I don't know how many people have that experience. You've worked on something for a long time, and then you leave, and then you see what happened to it. What happened to Justice League was a crisis of infinite doubt. A team of executives who lost faith in the architect of their faltering comic book movie empire, and a director in the midst of a family tragedy that sapped him of the will to fight. Joss Whedon, a director from another universe, the Marvel Cinematic One, left the Avengers after 2 movies and crossed over to comics rival DC, picking up Justice League not where Snyder left off, but remaking it significantly with extensive rewrites and hurried reshoots, just as the studio demanded. On November 17th, 2017, the team-up between Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Cyborg, Aquaman, and The Flash didn't so much debut in theaters as crash into them. It was sneered at by critics, shrugged at by baffled moviegoers, and all but disowned by those who created it. Whedon has since been accused of unprofessional and abusive behavior on set. The director declined repeated requests for a comment. He left his name off the movie except to claim a shared writing credit with Chris Terrio, who had written Snyder's previous installment, 2016's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Here's another great picture of him on set. And here's Gal Gadot from Batman v Superman. Publicly, everyone close to the movie practiced their smiles and rehearsed their talking points in the hopes of doing no further damage to the project. Not that it helped much. The movie earned $657 million globally, which sounds like a lot of money until you consider the nearly $300 million budget, including the reported $25 million for Whedon's reworking, plus a conservative estimate of $100 million to $150 million in marketing costs. Factor in the sizable cut theaters take from the box office, and a return of only $657 million is a clear money loser. 6 months later, Justice League's box office was dwarfed by Marvel's own all-star showcase, Avengers: Infinity War, which flexed its muscles at $2 billion. After their private screening of the Whedon cut, Nolan and Deborah Snyder emerged into the light with a shared mission. They came and they just said, "You can never see that movie," Zack Snyder says during lunch at his Pasadena office, a modernist series of cubes jutting from hillside that overlooks the Rose Bowl. "Because I knew it would break his heart," Deborah adds, his wife. That might seem overly dramatic. It's just show business after all, but the Snyders' hearts had already been through a lot. The battle over Justice League was agonizing, but it wasn't the worst thing to happen to their family that year. Not even close. Professionally, at least, things have vastly improved. For years, DC fans and Snyder enthusiasts who worshipped his high-octane brawn fests like like his Dawn of the Dead remake, his ancient Greek battle saga 3,000, or 300, pardon me. It was not 3, it was 300 Spartans, damn it. And his twisted Watchmen adaptation beat a drum on social media demanding that Warner Brothers return Justice League to its original filmmaker and allow him to share his version of the movie. They dubbed it #The Snyder Cut. The fans could be clever, but many were horrifyingly toxic. All of them were relentless, and they grew more numerous over time. Last May, they finally got their wish when Warner saw the potential to leverage all the free publicity and do something unprecedented on its upstart streaming service, HBO Max. Now, I wanted to stop here and editorialize. Now, when I was saying that no Snyder Cut existed, the Snyder Cut of Justice League is pretty much unprecedented in Hollywood history, because Justice League, the film, was done. You know, it's one thing for Zack Snyder, who is involved in Watchmen all the way through. He had multiple cuts of the film that he himself approved, that he himself worked on. Watchmen was released. It had, by the way, some great books that were released of gallery shots of the cast and the extras. There was the book of the artwork and everything. So Watchmen was a very well-documented, very supported film that Zack Snyder was able to finish not only the way he wanted, but he played ball with the studio knowing the film was going to be long. So the studio released a theatrical cut, then he had his director's cut, then he had his ultimate cut of Watchmen released to home video. So Zack Snyder had a very good relationship back in 2009 with Warner Brothers. That's why they allowed him, sure, Legends of the Guardians, the Owls of Gaul, and Sucker Punch. I think, in a way, both of those films are experimental films that Zack Snyder got the studio to let him make. And The Legends of the Guardians, I think, is a pretty wonderful movie. Sucker Punch is kind of insane. I didn't love it as a movie, but boy, I'm sure glad something like that exists. More power to him. And admittedly, I have a few Hot Toys figures from that movie. But it was a singular vision that Zack Snyder brings. And he does, I mean, of all the filmmakers working in Hollywood today, you can look at pretty much any frame of a Zack Snyder movie and go, you know what? That's a Zack Snyder film. Now, whether you love his movies or you don't love his movies or somewhere in between, having a real vision, an auteurist vision, and whether those visions are actually inspired by the comic book creators he's trying so faithfully to honor, such as people like, well, Dave Gibbons in Watchmen, Frank Miller with 300, or all the many, mostly Alex Ross, but all the many writers and artists that worked in the DC universe. Zack Snyder is definitely taking those images and putting his own spin on them, and that's something to be lauded. That's That's what we want out of filmmakers, and that's what we want out of art. Something unique to them. I'm always saying on this channel, authorship. Isn't that what we really want? Something that is transportive. The funny thing, when anyone's working in a cinematic universe that involves comic characters, you as a filmmaker might want to bring your own spin to things, but you're also dealing with an audience's expectation. What they want is to see their version of the character fully realized. So you as an artist might be doing something that other people might not necessarily jibe with. You might not be giving them exactly what they want. And our fan voice is very loud. It goes far and wide in this day and age of social media, so it's rough. But I have to say that, unfortunately, what happened in Zack Snyder's case is you had a film with Man of Steel that opened very respectable box office. Of course, the studio expected more because, unfortunately, rather than do what the MCU did and really start building their cinematic universe, they had Batman. They had Christopher Nolan's Batman movies to look at, and they're like, yeah, man, we got to get that $1 billion cheddar at the box office. That's what their expectations were going in, because they already had The Dark Knight, and then they're looking to see what Warner Brothers was looking to see what Disney was doing, what Marvel was doing. Kevin Feige, Louis D'Esposito, and Victoria Alonso and the team over at Marvel, they were on a very methodical uphill journey doing something unprecedented in Hollywood history. And it's like, well, we've got the granddaddy and granddaddies of all superheroes. We should be making that kind of cheddar. Well, you also need the kind of visionary that Kevin Feige is, and Kevin Feige is not the filmmaker. He's not the director. He is the impresario. He truly is a producer in the David O. Selznick fashion. He's a creative, active producer who has the vision, and everybody is working underneath that vision. It's actually kind of the way things are supposed to work, I think. If you have one of the great producers that's working on something like that, all franchises definitely need someone like that. And I think as a fan of the MCU and as a fan of what Kevin Feige's been doing, I think no one has done it better. Makes me feel sad for the rest, quite frankly. But anyway, so that's what was happening. And you've got Zack Snyder, who has a singular vision, who has now been tasked with this idea of being the architect of the DC cinematic universe. And he had Christopher Nolan, but both Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder, they're visionary talents. Their eyes are on the films they're making, not on the overarching design of all of this. And a studio executive, you can have a studio executive. Studio executives oversee things, but they're not visionary producers either. So what the DCEU or the DC universe, whatever you want to call it, was lacking was a singular producerial vision. Look, they have a great producer that works with Warner Brothers, Chuck Roven, who knows how to. He flies this plane. He can take off and he can land, and he can bring these giant unruly projects to their conclusion. But he's not a visionary. You know, he's a guy that gets movies made, but he's not the visionary that someone like Kevin Feige is. So the whole situation was a bit different and a lot more political. But let me just jump back into this article. Professionally, at least, things have vastly improved. For years, DC fans and Snyder enthusiasts. Wait a minute, I already read that. So, it's not uncommon for directors to lose creative control of big-budget studio spectacles, or for other filmmakers to step in. But it's unheard of for a studio to return to an exiled filmmaker and offer back the power and creative freedom it has yanked away, especially when some of the most beloved and lucrative characters in pop culture history are involved. The Snyder Cut's coming out March 18th. But they're very right about this. For the director's devotees, it's a Hollywood ending for a Hollywood story. But for the truly devastating thing that happened to Zack Snyder and his loved ones in 2017, there can be no fix, no do-over. In the throes of conflict with Warner Brothers, the Snyder's 20-year-old daughter, home from college in the middle of a long struggle with depression, took her own life. After 2 years spent largely focused on their other children and extended family, Zack and Deborah Snyder went back to work, a difficult but vital part of the healing process. When they spoke to Vanity Fair for this story, they were completing Army of the Dead, for Netflix, by the way, a zombie-filled heist extravaganza that will launch a new multi-pronged franchise for Netflix, as well as restoring Zack's original vision for Justice League. The latter will be a 4-hour event for HBO Max that will raise money for the suicide prevention programs that could help spare others the grief that shook his family. Their daughter's death was the reason the Snyders walked away from Justice League, realizing their fight and spirit was needed at home with their other children and with each other, rather than in a losing battle with a powerful studio. Now, she is the main reason he decided to come back. At the end of the movie, it says, "For Autumn," Snyder says, sitting in the shadows of a darkened editing suite, frames from the movie frozen on screens around him. When he talks about his daughter, the otherwise scrappy, jubilant 54-year-old filmmaker always looks away. Without her, this absolutely would not have happened. Zack and his then-wife, Denise Weber, adopted Autumn when she was 1. A little over 1, he says, smiling at the memory of her wild energy. Still an infant, but crazy. Autumn was slightly older than the couple's son, Eli. They had 2 more children before they divorced. Snyder had 2 sons with line producer Kirsten Ellen before marrying Deborah, his longtime producing partner. In 2004, with whom he adopted 2 more children. The filmmaker has often said that being an adoptive father is one of the reasons he was so invested in the story of Kal-El, a powerful being who became Superman thanks to the love and care of Jonathan and Martha Kent. More than 3 years after Autumn's death, Snyder still slips between the past and present tense when talking about her. "She's the only dork," he says of his family. "She was the only fan. The rest of them," he shrugs. Today, Eli is interested in filmmaking, but Autumn was the only one of his children who matched her dad's kid-like enthusiasm for gods, monsters, aliens, and superheroes. "She's super creative," he says. "She was a writer. She was at Sarah Lawrence to be a writer." Snyder swipes through his phone to show a selfie Autumn took in the Letterman jacket worn by Ray Fisher's character in Justice League, a football star horrendously wounded in a car accident and rebuilt by his scientist father into the half-robot warrior, Cyborg. Autumn had been in therapy and on medications, but the depression remained brutal. She was always wondering about her worth. "What is my worth? What am I supposed to do? What am I about?" Snyder stumbles on his words, his eyes glassy. The conversation was like, "Of course you're amazing. What do you mean you're worth? You're worth more than anything in the world." And she would be just like, "Yeah." Snyder says Autumn used writing to vent her pain, to channel it into her words that might contain it or explain it. She adored sci-fi. Her main characters are always in this battle with things from another dimension that no one can see, says Snyder, but it's a serious war, and that war was happening to her every day. "I think so many people are in that battle and they smile and they nod at you." The fact that a studio had lost faith in Snyder's ability to make Justice League seemed mundane and pointless after Autumn's death. "It's such a lightning strike in the center of this whole saga," says Snyder, "and in a lot of ways it has informed everything that we've done since." Now, it's important to say here, they lost faith in Zack Snyder, not necessarily because of Zack Snyder, but because the people at the studio had expectations they had placed on these projects that weren't necessarily being met. Man of Steel, while not a billion-dollar grossing movie, still grossed a respectable $600 and something million. Now, on the budget of Man of Steel, I mean, if they'd made it Man of Steel for $125 million or $150 million, maybe, but it was way above $250 or $200 million to be made. Batman v Superman cost a lot more than that, and this dark look at these characters was not necessarily, they thought, I mean, look, let me tell you a secret, and this comes from working at Warner Brothers for 2 years. As I've said before, I used to work, this is a long time ago, but I worked for Bill Young. I was a management trainee in the feature production department of Warner Brothers, which means basically I was a PA, but I was in the offices, the executive offices at Warner Brothers. Were all, back then it was all in one place, and I was in and out of Bob Daly and Terry Semmel's office, the people who ran Warner Brothers at the time, Bruce Berman, Mark Canton. I was in and out of those people's offices all day, every day. I hung out with the senior vice presidents and the people that were in charge of all of these projects. And I saw firsthand, because that's all I did was keep my eyes and ears open. And I was in those executive offices, in and out of them every day. And I'll tell you something that I learned. Here's what I learned about studio executives. They are very smart people. Most of them are Ivy League educated people that have business degrees. But they really have no idea what movies are going to work and what movies aren't going to work. Because they're not paid to be visionaries. What they're doing is they're looking at other things. This was successful, so that might be successful. And another thing is, you're always living in fear, because if you fuck up, if you champion a filmmaker and champion a movie and it fails, that could be the end of your career in Hollywood. So it doesn't exactly foster the studio system, the studio executives. It's not a necessarily happy place where everybody's like, oh my God, we're making movies today. Isn't this great? Isn't this incredible? I mean, somebody one day has got to write the great tell-all book about what it's like to be a studio executive. Not a producer, not like You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again, not like Julia Phillips's book, but what it's like to be a real studio executive. And it's not just because I work there and I do. Of course, I produced The Hills Run Red, our horror film. Joel Silver was our executive producer, and that was also produced through Warner Brothers. So I have definitely an affinity. I think Warner Brothers is the best studio, and it also has some of the best filmmaker relations, or it did over the last 50 years. Clint Eastwood, Malpaso Productions, has been on that lot for, I don't know, since the early 70s. Stanley Kubrick, Richard Donner, and Joel Silver had a decades-long run at Warner Brothers. I mean, Warner Brothers was the studio to have relationships with filmmakers, ongoing relationships. And Zack Snyder had that at Warner Brothers, along with Christopher Nolan. That's why they teamed them up. So here was a studio that had thrown in with Zack Snyder. They believed in him because of his previous work. Now, I'll tell you something. No one at a studio is surprised. No one comes into work one day and thinks to themselves or sees or realizes, like, oh my God, do you see what Zack Snyder is doing? The studios know on a daily basis what goes on in the production of a film. The department that I worked in, feature production, one of my jobs every day was to distribute call sheets and production reports. Production reports were reports on the days, how much film was shot, the time it was filmed, how many scenes were accomplished, what did they knew exactly where the film was at any moment. And then a call sheet is all the crews, the cast and crew that's shooting or that's working the next day. So my job was to distribute those pieces of paper to all of the high-ranking executives at Warner Brothers on a daily basis, which is why I was in and out of their offices every day. And sometimes I'd have to distribute 3 or 4 versions of those things every day as they changed. And then after lunch, the executives, and again, this was a long time ago, but all the executives that were covering their projects would go watch dailies usually from 2 o'clock to 4 or 5 or whatever. Now I'm sure it's all done online, but before they literally had to go to a screening room and watch dailies. So no one can ever say that, oh, we had no idea where this is going. The studio executives watched every step of the way as those movies were made. Everyone believed that Zack Snyder was the man while they were making Superman and even Batman v Superman. If you believe the reports, the first cut that everybody watched of Batman v Superman, the long version, I guess it would be the ultimate version, maybe it was a little longer, everyone loved it and thought it was going to be a monster hit. They don't know, because if you ask a studio executive, let's talk about Superman lore, and why might people not like Man of Steel or not like Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, most of them couldn't tell you. Now there are very smart studio executives, like people like Walter Hamada, who definitely know this material and know the lore, but their job is not to pour over all the comics mythology they can the way we as film fans can. Like, I've never been in a meeting with any studio executive that knew more about this stuff than I do, ever. And that's not a boast. That's just a fact, because studio executives have other things on their mind than surrounding themselves with action figures and reading omnibuses and scouring all the fan sites. It's just a different way. It's just a different way of life. You can't expect that. You know who you can expect that from, though? Kevin Feige. That's why he is where he is, because he's probably the only executive in the history of the business that has an intimate knowledge of what it is he's working on. Remember, he worked on 13 Marvel projects as a producer before starting the MCU. He saw what worked. He saw what didn't work. He worked for Richard Donner. He was learning the business, but he was watching one thing. Kevin Feige is focused on one thing in his career as a producer, and that is Marvel and the Marvel characters and all the different takes on them. Warner Brothers doesn't have that. And the people at Warner Brothers that were overseeing these projects, they honestly don't know. They think they know. They're looking at these amazing visuals. They're looking at the performances of all the actors. Everything looks good, but they don't know. So what happened with Warner Brothers is they're perplexed. Superman, Man of Steel comes out, doesn't make $1 billion. Why? How can you possibly look at this movie? What is wrong with this movie? Well, even the fan base it's one of the most divisive movies I've ever seen. People's takes on whether or not they like Zack Snyder's approach. And then he continues it with Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. And all the people all the executives know is that, Zack Snyder's approach is not what we'd hoped. It hasn't been embraced by the fans. It hasn't been embraced by the public. Now, but here's the thing. This is a course correction they wanted to make very late in the game. And the studio executives now, they're not interested in whether Zack Snyder's making good movies anymore, because the movies he makes are decidedly very accomplished films. And dare I say it, for studio films, they're out there. But so far he's been successful. But with Batman v Superman, and remember, the studio made him cut it down. You can't make this a 3-hour movie. So a lot of the problem here is a disconnect between a studio that really doesn't understand why their movies aren't generating Marvel numbers, and everyone's panicking. Kevin Tsujihara, the person at the time who was running Warner Brothers, is panicking because shareholders want to know, well, how come we aren't making that Disney dollar that the Marvel studios are bringing in? Well, because the Marvel Studios carefully planned, and they looked and saw what worked, and they made a film, and if they needed to make an adjustment, they would. I mean, the funny thing about Marvel, actually not the funny thing, you gotta love the fact that they've embraced even movies that people thought were not as good as maybe they should have been. And this is not to be disparaging, but whether it was The Incredible Hulk, whether it was Iron Man 2, whether it was Thor: The Dark World, elements of all of those movies have continually showed up in the rest of the MCU. They've taken it all. You know, no one at Marvel is disavowing any of the movies they've made, nor do they disavow their filmmakers. I'm not including James Gunn in this statement because they wouldn't have disavowed him if Disney brass hadn't done it for them. Anyway, I just want to point out that at the time with the Snyder Cut, the studio, or with Justice League, well, we'll go on. Now, I just want to set that idea up. In 2010, when he first began working on DC movies for Warner Brothers, Snyder was promoted. Let me switch over here. Snyder was promoted as a visionary director, though critics sometimes differed. Even his hits could be divisive. He'd emerged from music videos and commercials with the breakout remake of Dawn of the Dead in 2004 and followed it up with the otherworldly, visually audacious tale of Resistance 300, which became a box office behemoth in 2007. Of course, remember, 300 was based on a comic, Frank Miller's comic of the same name, and Snyder was literally able to take what was on the page and give it life in, I think, one of the ultimate examples of great fealty to a comic book work, to a graphic novel work. Given his choice of projects, Snyder picked Watchmen, the iconic graphic novel that scorned the classic tropes of superhero storytelling and explored the corrupting nature of power. His 2009 adaptation upended comic book expectations, just as Hollywood was building epic new franchises. Snyder then made a pair of box office disappointments, a digitally animated adventure about warring owls called Legends of the Guardians, and the surreal and some would say sexist action movie Sucker Punch, before being called to take on a legend among legends, Superman. When it debuted in 2013, Man of Steel established Henry Cavill as an object of global thirst, just as 300 had done for Gerald Butler and his washboard abs. Snyder's twist was to prevent a conflicted Clark Kent rather than the sunny alter ego played by Christopher Reeve. Snyder's Superman was willing to kill for what he thought was right, which many longtime fans of the character found reprehensible, and though he still saved the world, he never felt like he truly belonged in it. The studio had hoped for more than the $668 million it made at the box office, but Man of Steel fared well enough for Snyder to get another shot, this time bringing Ben Affleck into the universe as Bruce Wayne in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. The subtitle was a giveaway. This would be a prologue to Justice League, a superhero crossover event that some moviegoers had been pining for forever. Like me. I was pining forever for a Justice League movie. Snyder wasn't just making big-budget tentpoles. He'd become the architect of the entire DC cinematic universe, and his casting choices continue to resonate. He chose Gal Gadot to play Wonder Woman in Batman v Superman and produced Patty Jenkins' standalone movie about the Amazonian princess. I remember Gal saying to me, "Zach, I was going to quit the business. I was getting ready to just move back to Tel Aviv and just have a life there. I was done with Hollywood. I was going to do this one more audition." Then she came in, and I was like, that's my Wonder Woman. Now, she's the whole world's. As with Man of Steel, Snyder continued to challenge expectations and norms, which sometimes led to pushback from the studio and originalist fans. Aquaman, for instance, has always looked waspy in the comics. In casting the role for Batman v Superman, Snyder decided to forego the blonde hair and blue eyes of the comic book hero in favor of the long, dark locks and smoky gaze of Jason Momoa, who had come in to audition for Bruce Wayne. He's a Pacific Islander. There's a connection to the sea. What if he's Aquaman, Zach remembers thinking. Everyone was like, you're insane. This is not a thing. By the way, there's Ray Fisher, I would assume. Yeah, here's another picture by Zack Snyder of Ray Fisher on the set. It became a pattern. The studio gave Snyder the power to go anywhere he chose with its most valuable characters, and he always went somewhere other than what they wanted, the director says. Still, to his credit, all the recent DC films have used Snyder's universe as a foundation, even Suicide Squad and Birds of Prey, which take place in his version of Gotham City. The upcoming Flash film will connect all the disparate DC films by ricocheting through multiple universes, with Michael Keaton's Batman appearing along with Affleck's. But harsh reviews for Batman v Superman demolished Warner Brothers' confidence in Snyder. Even the director's champions, like production head Greg Silverman, were worried. When Batman v Superman came out, and we did get a negative reaction from the fans, it was disheartening for all of us, says Silverman, now the founder and head of independent content company Stampede Ventures. Zack had made these movies, like 300, that were such crowd pleasers. And that was our job, to make crowd pleasers. And here, we've made a movie together, and it didn't really please the audience. Now, to be fair, this is exactly correct. The studios are in the business of making giant, crowd-pleasing entertainments. That's what they want to do. And Snyder's vision for these things might have been different, but I would say this. I think in the case of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, the studio has to take responsibility because they released an inferior version of the movie. They once again were second-guessing based on commercial concerns. I get it. I understand this. But here's the thing. If you watch a movie and you think it's great, and it's 3 hours, and then you decide, okay, well, with 3 hours, we can only get so many shows a day, and then you force your filmmaker to cut the movie down to 2.5 hours, and you've lost 30 minutes of the film, that doesn't necessarily make the movie better. What's really important is the movie needs to be, at least in my opinion, people say no one knows anything in Hollywood. I'll tell you this. It doesn't matter how long a movie is. What matters is you have the best version of that movie. That's the version you put out into the world. If you're only making a decision based on running time, you're fucked because you're not doing what you're supposed to do, which is make the best crowd-pleasing entertainment you can. And if you make that, If you build it, they will come, Ray. That's what you have to do. So if you have a film like Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice that works better in its ultimate cut, ultimate format, whatever, you release the best version of that movie. Look, the same thing happened, if I dare say, only because I worked on it for 2 years, to Superman Returns. They decided to cut a half an hour out of that movie because when they showed it to friends and family, they're like, the first 20 minutes of this movie doesn't have any dialogue in it. No one knows what Krypton was, so there's no return to Krypton scene. I think the version of Superman Returns was better at almost 3 hours than it was the version that was released. Again, a studio call. A studio call. Another film that I believe underperformed at the box office because the studio was just buying into this, well, we got to have it to be shorter to get so many shows a day. Now, there is merit to that, obviously. However, in the long run, if the film isn't making people coming back and seeing it again and again and again, like the fans, people are saying, well, the fans don't matter because they're going to turn out anyway. That's true, but the fans also turn out 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 times if they love the movie. As good as I think Endgame and Infinity War are, it was because people like myself had to go see those movies 6 times a piece in the theater. So anyway, yes. So let me get back to this article. Marvel Studios movies, whose success exerted so much pressure on the DC team, hit on a formula. First of all, this is another thing that studios do. They're always looking at other out there. What about them? We got to be like them. No one ever gets rich in Hollywood following a trend. You have to set your trends, people. You have to set the trends. You can't follow in anyone's footsteps. You gotta blaze your own trail. That's what you gotta be. And that's what they were doing. That was another big problem at Warner Brothers. Also, they had an upcoming AT&T merger, so it's like, we gotta get that stock price up, boys, so we get our big payout. No, you have one job. You have to make good movies that make lots of money. That's your job. Don't worry about your fucking AT&T payout, motherfucker. What you got to do is you got to make sure your movies are good. Then you don't have to worry about your AT&T payout because you will have earned it. Earned it. But no, let's go look at someone else and what they're doing. Let me tell you. I've said this before on this show. Best advice I can give any of you. It does not matter how good someone is. Someone else is. It doesn't make you any better or any worse. Where did I get that? I got that from a low-budget Miramax movie called Pastime that director Robin Armstrong made, which is why I went to work for him. That was one of my favorite things I ever... Noble Williams says this to William Russ in the movie. I thought it was the greatest advice I ever heard. Anyway, so... Marvel Studios movies, whose success exerted so much pressure on the DC team, hit on a formula that mirrored their comic book roots, telling stories about relatable, everyday people grappling with sudden phenomenal powers. Snyder's DC universe approached its superheroes from the opposite direction, depicting gods and immortals who are at ease wielding cosmic strengths, but strained to be human and connect to the ordinary world. Right. That's the difference between Marvel and DC. The director envisioned this as operatic, tragic, and perhaps a more challenging type of comic book storytelling, but Warner Brothers feared it made his heroes gloomy, their abilities a curse. Once again, not true. Look at the comic book renaissance of the 80s, when everything went dark. I mean, I understand you don't have to tell always a dark superhero story, but making this... Zack Snyder was making a metal, like I said, it's a metal universe, but he was also doing something exactly that, operatic, Wagnerian, like Das Ring of the Nibelung. That's what he was doing, and via Alex Ross's imagery. But anyway, they bought into that, and they lost their confidence. They lost their confidence in their filmmaker. It's not like they weren't. And by the way, they didn't really lose their confidence. They only lost their confidence after the movies came out and didn't do what they thought. They thought that they had scored big because they weren't necessarily in touch with the audience. Let me go back to this. Diane Nelson, who was president of DC Entertainment at the time, and by the way, I'm a huge Diane Nelson fan, just so you know. Diane Nelson got Hills Run Red greenlit. I did some work for Global Brand Management during the time I worked on Superman Returns, and I love Diane Nelson. Diane, she's no longer Warner Brothers, so I'm not trying to kiss her ass, just so you know. Diane Nelson, who's president of DC Entertainment at the time, says she appreciated that Snyder was more into deconstructing the familiar than just recapitulating it. Zack is a masterful visual storyteller who goes deep on individual characters, she says. For some people, that is amazing, and for other people, that becomes the problem because they have fixed opinions about who these DC characters are and are not. In 2016, as principal photography got underway on Justice League in the United Kingdom, rumors percolated that Snyder had been fired from the film. That didn't happen, but Warner Brothers' then chairman and CEO, Kevin Tsujihara, and a brilliant, brilliant move, Kevin. This is the kind of move you do to really instill confidence in your filmmakers. Kevin Tsujihara did assign watchdogs in the form of DC Entertainment creative chief Jeff Johns and Warner Brothers co-production head John Berg. The edict was clear. At least one of them had to be on set every day. I am surrounded by the work of Jeff Johns. I'm a fan of Jeff Johns. I've been reading him for a long time. I read his entire run of Green Lantern. I've read most of his runs, Teen Titans, Justice Society. I've read a lot, hundreds of Jeff Johns comics. What the fuck is he doing overseeing Zack Snyder making a movie? Seriously, what the fuck? I understand he interned at Donner. It's not like he's somebody who's not he knew the industry, but he doesn't know about making films. He's not a filmmaker. Why does John Berg and why does Jeff Johns have to go sit on set and oversee Zack Snyder? What the fuck could they possibly tell him? Seriously, what could they tell him? I mean, I saw this, by the way. I saw this happen. I worked at Warner Brothers on Bonfire of the Vanities, and one of my bosses, a guy named Ron Smith, was sent by the studio to sit on the set of Bonfire of the Vanities. One day, Ron Smith just disappeared, and everyone liked Ron Smith. He was a very funny guy. He was great to be around, and they basically exiled him to do the same thing. You know, we've lost confidence in Fred Caruso and Brian De Palma. You go, and he was a sacrificial lamb. All the problems, whatever happened on that, was going to fall back on Ron Smith. I watched this, but let me tell you, there is nothing that is more disruptive to a director than having people that the studio has sent out to babysit him from doing his job or her job. So Berg, who's now production president at Stampede, recalls that duty as a low point. It was really tricky and not a position that I loved. I wonder why. To be honest, he says, I tried to be forthright about what I thought creatively. My job was to try and mediate between a creator whose vision is instinctively dark and a studio that perceived, rightly or wrong, that fans wanted something lighter. Okay, man, but this is a decision that needs to be made before you're on the fucking set. You see it in previs. You have it in the script. You know, I could even see that after Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Why not make it lighter? I can understand that. I can see that. But you know what? If you're going to have Steppenwolf and Darkseid and Apocalypse and the New Gods and have all the Justice League fighting against another extinction level event, what are you going to do? Sing Kumbaya? Sing a few Jim Croce songs? Give me a fucking break, man. This is the studio. This is not Zack Snyder. I was respectful. This is Berg going on. I was respectful of the director and didn't pursue things that were coming at me from the corporate side that I thought weren't in line with what would make the best movie. Listen, let me tell you something. I know creative, you loggerhead, you butt heads when you're making a movie with people. And that's part of the process, and it can be great. But when your employers, the studio, are overseeing the production of a film, and you've already made how many movies for that studio, and yet there's people from the studio going, maybe you should have a joke here or something. You have fucking lost. Whoever's running the studio fucked up, and it's the studio's fucking fault, because if you don't understand the direction of your own goddamn projects, that's on you. That's on the studio. And the studio, of course, they want to blame the filmmaker, because no, it's the studio that green lights these projects. It's the studio that knows and sees every shred of film. They see all the previews. They see what's going on. I mean, you can even watch it. In my documentary on the making of Superman Returns, I was at Warner Brothers. I was at Warner Brothers 6 months before Superman Returns started shooting. They had a beautiful art department that Guy Hendricks Dias was running. You could see giant pictures on the walls and things that were storyboarded and sets that were being designed. You could see everything. You could go in there and go, here's the kind of movie we're making. It's right here. It's not rocket science. If you have to send executives from the studio to sit on a set already, you, my friend, whoever's running your studio, you have fucked up and you didn't do your job. Anyway, Snyder knew why Johns and Berg were on the set. You could say babysit, he says. Many filmmakers would have bristled at the intrusion, but he was gracious. It didn't bother me too much because they weren't that threatening. I just felt that the ideas that they did have, where they were trying to inject humor and stuff like that, it wasn't anything that was too outrageous. But Warner Brothers did nix some of his more sweeping notions for Justice League, like adding a romance between Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne and Amy Adams' Lois Lane, who was mourning Superman's death in the previous film. The intention was that Bruce fell in love with Lois and then realized that the only way to save the world was to bring Superman back to life, says Snyder. So he had this insane conflict because Lois, of course, was still in love with Superman. We had this beautiful speech where Bruce said to Alfred, "I never had a life outside the cave. I never imagined a world for me beyond this. But this woman makes me think that if I can get this group of gods together, then my job is done. I can quit. I can stop." And of course, that doesn't work out for him. It didn't work out for Snyder either. The studio said no. And I'll flat out tell you, I've read a million Superman comics. I've seen all the different iterations of Superman that ever existed. But the idea that after Superman dies and he takes up with Lois Lane, and Lois Lane is the person that might save Batman's soul, I would love to have seen that in a movie. Let me tell you. Let me tell you. The downside of making epics is the studio's financial expectations. For Justice League, Warner Brothers wanted a big, round $1 billion in global box office, which Snyder's movies had never reached. In January of 2017, the director showed his first cut to Kevin Tsujihara. It did not go well, according to Snyder and others. Tsujihara, who resigned from Warner Brothers in 2019 amid a sexual misconduct scandal involving the aspiring actress Charlotte Kirk, declined an interview request. Yeah, man, you're head of your studios banging hot actresses instead of paying attention to your fucking movie. Story of Hollywood's life. Among the issues was the length of the film. There was a mandate from Tsujihara that the movie be 2 hours long, says Snyder. Why, Kevin Tsujihara? Why should it be 2 hours long? What are you basing that on? You have your script. You apparently watched all the previs. You're watching all the dailies. You just arbitrarily decided that the movie needed to be 2 hours long. Who the fuck gave you that idea? Seriously. I mean, seriously, why would you think that? What conventional wisdom tells you that? Look at the length of the latest Marvel movies. How long are they? How much money did they make? Anyway, that order had a paradoxical impact because it meant eliminating much of the heart and humor the studio also wanted, like a comical romantic subplot between Ezra Miller's Flash and Kiersey Clemons' Iris, the latter of whom was entirely absent from the Whedon film. On the day Vanity Fair visited his office, Snyder was working on finalizing the music for the restored scene in which the Flash rescues her from a car crash. Snyder also saw a bigger structural problem with the make it shorter order. How am I supposed to introduce 6 characters and an alien with potential for world domination in 2 hours? I mean, I can do it. It can be done. Clearly, it was done, he says, referring to Whedon's version, but I didn't see it. Reports that Snyder himself asked Whedon for help were false. Johns, one of the studio-appointed babysitters, had been planning a Batgirl movie with Whedon, and Snyder and the others say Johns recruited him to do rewrites for Justice League. John's representatives didn't respond to a request for comment. Once again, Snyder was gracious and even hopeful. I thought maybe he could write some cool scenes. I thought that would be fun. Soon, it became clear that Warner Brothers was giving Whedon more and more power. He would not just advise during reshoots, but also do some directing himself. Snyder says he only had one conversation with Whedon about the studio's notes. Reeling from Autumn's death and finding anguish in their work rather than relief, Zack and Deborah quit. We just lost the will to fight that fight in a lot of ways, said Zack. All of us, the whole family, were just so broken by losing Autumn that having those conversations in the middle of it really became, I was like, really? Frankly, I think we did the right thing because I think it would have been incredibly belligerent or we just rolled over. God damn right. First of all, look at that. You bring in Joss Whedon because, what did he direct from? Yeah, I know. Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron. Movies I love, to be honest. I love Age of Ultron too. Both of them grossed $1.5 billion. So you get in a room. Zack Snyder gets in a room with Joss Whedon. Here's the guy that directed two $1.5 billion movies, and here's the guy that our filmmaker hasn't yet made a $1 billion movie, and we're giving a guy more and more and more power. Who puts their employees into that kind of a position? That is a losing proposition. Can you imagine how demoralizing that must have been? What kind of management? What kind of this is not good producing, people. A good producer makes sure that your director and all of your crew and all of your cast has exactly what they need to have to make the best movie possible. That's what good producing is. That's what good producing is. First, you find the great material, then you hire all the best people, and then you make sure those people are given exactly what they need to make the best film possible. Can you imagine if you're in the middle of making your movie and somebody brings in another director? There isn't anything more demoralizing I could possibly think of. And Zack Snyder's like open to it. I mean, I've seen him on the set. I haven't seen Quentin Tarantino and Zack Snyder seem to be the two people I've seen, at least in behind the scenes footage that admittedly has been released to the public, that look like they're having the best time in the world. And you give that guy, a guy like Joss Whedon, who comes in, doesn't have to say anything, walks around, I'm sure, and says, my last two movies grossed $1.5 billion. I can't even imagine. One by one, he called members of his cast and crew. I remember I was in a movie theater, coincidentally enough. Ray Fisher sat on the set of Snyder's reshoots last fall. I was walking into the AMC right in Times Square, and I got the call from Zack, and he was saying that he had to deal with stuff and the family, and he was having to step away. I had a trillion questions, and my heart sank. Whedon reshot about 3/4 of Justice League, from what Snyder can gather. When fans ask him about details of the movie that bears his name, he usually has no idea what they're talking about. Worst of all, for Warner Brothers, Whedon didn't exactly save the movie. When we got to see what Joss actually did, it was stupefying. Okay, here's a lot of people have been quoting this. When we got to see what Joss actually did, it was stupefying, says a studio executive who requested anonymity. I don't like this. It could be somebody in marketing. So, I mean, give me somebody higher up. And by the way, if this is your opinion, own it. Own it. Own your opinion. When we got to see what Joss actually did, it was stupefying, says a studio executive who requested anonymity. The robber on the rooftop, so goofy and awful. The Russian family, so useless and pointless. Everyone knew it. It was so awkward because nobody wanted to admit what a piece of shit it was. Oh, so you've already sabotaged Zack Snyder, then you've hired your boy Joss Whedon. It's not working, so now you're going to sit back and just what? Let the car run right into the wall? Oh, apparently yes, that's exactly what they did. Justice League opened on November 17th, 2017, and cratered. Because Cavill had been making Mission Impossible Fallout during the reshoots, Whedon's team had to digitally erase his mustache in Justice League, which led to a bizarre warping of his face. The jokes fell flat, and behind the scenes, some of the cast had revolted. Ray Fisher has publicly claimed Whedon was abusive on set and that Warner Brothers executives enabled his actions. Gal Gadot told the Los Angeles Times that she also had a negative experience with Whedon, which she reported to higher-ups. After concluding its investigation, Warner Brothers announced that remedial action had been taken, though the studio didn't offer specifics. Days before that announcement, HBO, a division of Warner Media, parted ways with Whedon on the sci-fi series The Nevers. Fisher continues to clash with the studio and has expressed dismay at the outcome of its investigation. Now, let me be clear here. I am not offering any support of Joss Whedon, nor being his defender. I've never met Joss Whedon. I've enjoyed the programs he's made. I don't know him as a human being personally. I've heard good things about him. I've heard not so good things about him and everything that's been coming out lately. But I also want to say, just for the record, the position that Joss Whedon was put in, they probably paid him. I don't know what he got paid, but he probably made more money on this one job coming in to fix Justice League than any other thing he's ever done. And he was put also in the worst position a director could possibly be put in. The pressure on him would have been enormous. Does that excuse bad behavior? Certainly not. Certainly not. But basically, Warner Brothers had created the worst possible and most toxic way to make a film ever. And it has to be understood, this was all bad all the way around. And the studio is entirely to blame. Entirely to blame. The cast were very loyal to Zack, and they were hurting for him, says Nelson, the former DC president. It would have been a difficult environment for any new director to walk into, the most difficult possibly in Hollywood history. I have no doubt about that. But then how Joss chose to handle it is Joss's to live with. In the aftermath of Whedon's version, a new narrative arose on social media. #release the Snyder Cut. Snyder gradually began to encourage the movement, but it was hardly the first thing on his mind. From the time we left, says Snyder, it was not a great year, but we did a lot of stuff with family. It was really important. An important year. That year together became 2. After grieving Autumn and starting to heal with the family, he began to work on Army of the Dead, a visceral, funny, and exceedingly dark smash-and-grab story about an elite strike team that goes into a zombie-overrun Las Vegas to retrieve a hidden fortune before the hot zone is nuked. The zombie virus emerges from Area 51, so aliens may be involved too. Let me just tell you that after reading that description, I am so all in the bag for Army of the Dead. Bring it on. No wonder there's a prequel and an animated series also, because boy, does that sound awesome to me. During a day-long interview, Snyder giddily scans through concept art for an accompanying animated series approving vehicles, otherworldly weapons, and supernatural beings. He makes suggestions for changes to his team of artists, all working remotely via Zoom. Behind him on the wall-length bookshelf, there's a frame with 2 photos. Autumn and Eli in their bathing suits as toddlers, beaming with the same smiles as their dad as he assesses his monsters. The Army of the Dead movie is a lot to tackle, and the related prequel and animated series even more all-consuming. Scott Stuber, head of original films at Netflix, says it's a chance to build a world with a filmmaker who's hungry to return. Zack went through something very difficult, and I think he's probably realized, like we all do, it's okay to be vulnerable. For those of us lucky enough to know him and Deborah, he's a very soulful, kind, thoughtful human being. He's got this facade of big action movies and all this bravado things, but there's a kind sweetness to him. By the way, again, never met him, but you can see that in the behind-the-scenes footage. At the time of stories of abusive creators, Snyder is an anomaly. Even executives who are sometimes at odds with him agree that he's genuinely nice. I'd be stronger than that, says Greg Silverman. He's a wonderful guy and fostered a wonderful working environment on his sets. He's really valued the crew. He values his cast. Snyder's movies tend to be about strength and what it means to wield it. Maybe it was the inevitable that he'd eventually not only join the Release the Snyder Cut bandwagon, but began driving it. Now, here's one of my favorite parts of this story. Let's read it together, shall we? When Snyder left Warner Brothers, he took his laptop, which was emblazoned with a Justice League sticker. On the hard drive was his original, nearly 4-hour version. It was devoid of visual effects, music, and all the fine-tuning that makes a movie a movie. It was also in black and white. To him, it was a memento. He thought, we'd just show it to random people who stop by, like our friends or whatever. That was the Snyder Cut as it existed when Zack Snyder left the project. A 4-hour version devoid of visual effects, music, and all the fine-tuning that made a movie into a movie. It was also in black and white. To him, it was a memento. He thought, we could just show it to random people who stop by, like our friends or whatever. That's the Snyder Cut. Like we were always saying, not a movie that could be released. And I'll tell you something else. People might ask, and I don't know if this is the case, but as an editor myself, I think the reason it was in black and white, because they shoot so much with green screen. When you're watching footage with lots of green screen, it's really difficult to edit that footage. But you know what makes it a lot easier to edit that footage? That's right, if you turn off the color. It works better that way, just so you know. I don't know if that's why they only had a black and white version of it, but I would assume that was the case. Because when you're trying to edit footage with lots of green screen, it's very hard to concentrate on getting those cuts correct. Anyway, that's just what I thought. So that's why. I mean, the film wasn't even in color. Rather than fade away, the demand for the Snyder Cut gained momentum over the years. Groups paid to have single-engine airplanes fly a Release the Snyder Cut banner around both the Warner Brothers studio lot in Burbank and the annual Comic-Con gathering in San Diego. Last year, fans pooled resources to buy a Times Square billboard. A noxious contingent of followers, though, didn't just advocate for the movie, but also used social media to attack people who were critical of Snyder or their cause. That happened to me, too. A lot of people still attack me, even today, about my thoughts on the Snyder Cut, even though everything I ever thought about the Snyder Cut has been confirmed, and especially this article finding out what the Snyder Cut actually was. It's exactly what I've been saying, even since the beginning. So, yeah, there was a cut of the movie with no visual effects, no music, and it was black and white. But now it goes on. This is great. A noxious contingent of followers, though, didn't just advocate for the movie, but also used social media to attack people who were critical of Snyder or their cause. Maybe they hoped to silence dissenters, or maybe they were just trolls being trolls. In any case, by the way, I don't think, for the most part, even though that people have come after me, telling me I don't know what I'm talking about or whatever, even the most noxious people that came after me, they were not bad. These are not people, these are people that believe there was something about the Snyder Cut and Zack Snyder and the fact that we all of us, even the people that have been the most rude to me online, we have a common ground. And that is, we love this material. And it was always apparent to me, even the worst people that came after me, they believed in this project. And that's where their ire came from. If they thought that, for the most part, they thought I should believe with them. And perhaps I should. I knowing how the business worked, I think the methodology, I thought it was a lost cause. I never thought we'd see the Snyder Cut. Why? Because as this article points out, the Snyder Cut had a long way to go before anybody could watch it. But this goes on. Unfortunately, I think a lot of online fandom culture is headed in this very toxic direction, says Kaylee Donaldson, who writes for Pajiba.com. It's especially strong from Snyder Cut acolytes, she adds, perhaps because they misguidedly to the director's tales of loner heroes, because they respond misguidedly to the director's tale of loner heroes in a hostile world. I don't get this from the Birds of Prey fans or Shazam fans, says Donaldson. Well, there's a reason for that, Miss Donaldson, but I won't get into it. I got a little bit of Joker fans, but nowhere near the same level. Nonetheless, she's looking forward to Snyder's movie. I think 300 is great fun. I think the first 10 minutes of Watchmen are some of the best things any superhero movie has ever done. Even if she doesn't end up liking the Snyder Cut, she says, I would rather watch one person's chaos than a committee's snooze fest. Drea Letamendi, a clinical psychologist who explores superhero archetypes on the Arkham Sessions podcast. Ooh, I want to listen to that. I don't know that. Sorry, Drea, if I got your name wrong. Notes that fans get especially aggressive on social media when they feel they've been denied something. What I have observed is an enduring false sense of ownership, which can manifest as abuse, threats, and strong, intense reactions when a story doesn't go their way, she says. Fighting for the unseen cut of the film became a cause. In some quarters, the worst behavior metastasized. They're shouting and people are listening to them. Even if it's negative comments, they're getting positive reinforcement to continue down that path. Trolls may have actually held back the movement, like looters at an otherwise peaceful demonstration. Snyder cringes at descriptions of the abusive tactics. I 100% think it's wrong, he says. I don't think that anyone should be calling anyone anything. I've always tried to give people in fandom attention who do good things. Zack Snyder has been wonderful about that. November 2019 brought a sustained hashtag push on Twitter, which Snyder promoted. Godot and Affleck were now calling for his cut to be released too. A few days later, Toby Emmerich, chairman of Warner Brothers Picture Group, called Snyder with an offer. Let's try again. A lot of the people at the company, myself included, always felt badly that Zack didn't get to finish his vision of this film because of the circumstances, says Emmerich. And so if there was a way to make it logistically and financially possible, which HBO Max did, and Zack had a willingness to do it, it seemed like a win for everybody. Bruh. Can I just say, Toby Emmerich, I've always respected you. You've produced like 100 movies. And you worked at you worked at New Line, now you're at Warner Brothers. But come on, enough with the BS. This is some bullshit, sir. Let me just say, let's read what Toby Emmerich said. A lot of the people at the company, myself included, always felt badly that Zack didn't get to finish his vision of the film because of the circumstances. No, the circumstances were your circumstances, and he didn't finish the film because of you, and the administration at Warner Brothers lost all faith in him and wanted him gone. Let's be clear on that, and you should be able to admit that now. Just do that, says Emmerich. And so, if there was a way to make it logistically and financially possible, which HBO Max did, and Zack had a willingness to do it, it seemed like a win for everybody. But I got to hand it to Toby Emmerich, because one thing you got to do in Hollywood is be a political animal, and this statement, he comes out and says, and if there was a way to make it logistically and financially possible, which HBO Max did, and Zack had a willingness to do it, it seemed like a win for everybody. Why is that important, the way he put that? Because he didn't ultimately take credit. He gave it to HBO Max. Smart guy. That's why he is where he is. So Toby, good for you, sir. And I like Frequency. How about that? He wrote it, by the way. He wrote Frequency. Yes, a studio executive like Mike DeLuca writing In the Mouth of Madness. I know Mike DeLuca was not happy with the way the Mike In the Mouth of Madness came out. He wanted it to be a little different. But Mike DeLuca did write In the Mouth of Madness. Toby Emmerich did write Frequency, which is why he was a producer on the TV show too. You got to give it up for any studio executive who is also a creative. So you can't hate Toby Emmerich. Initially, says Snyder, Warner Brothers, I love this part. Initially, says Snyder, Warner Brothers just wanted to release the raw footage that was on his laptop. I was like, this is Zack saying, I was like, that's a no. That's a hard no, Zack says. And they're like, Warner Brothers is like, but why? You can just put up the rough cut. Snyder didn't trust their motivations. I go, here's why. 3 reasons, and I want everybody who's wanted the Snyder Cut to come out. Here's why you do not ever, 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 ever release something that's not finished to your satisfaction. I go, here's why. 3 reasons. 1, you get the internet off your back, which is probably your main reason for wanting to do this. 2, you get to feel vindicated for making things right, I guess, on some level. And 3, you get a shitty version of the movie that you can point to and go, see, it's not that good anyway, so maybe the studio was right. Zack was like, no chance. I would rather just have the Snyder Cut be a mythical unicorn for all time. Snyder estimates that it cost around $70 million to undo Whedon's redo. For that, HBO Max gets 4 hours of hotly anticipated programming and the Hollywood comeback story of a lifetime. Snyder gets himself nothing. I'm not getting paid, he says. He was paid the first time, of course. This time, he wants creative control, and foregoing a fee helped. I'll bet it did. I didn't want to be beholden to anyone, and it allowed me to keep my negotiating powers with these people pretty strong. Fisher, for one, Ray Fisher, was eager to return. There's not a day that's gone by over the last 3 years I haven't thought about this movie, that I have not sat up at night thinking, what if there was a world wherein this thing actually does get released, says the actor, sitting on a set in his grayscale motion capture suit. I probably should have let it go, but there was so much we left behind in this version of the film. It's a completely different movie. As for the fan base, the Snyder movement has contributed $500,000 to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention through donations, sales of merchandise, and auctions of props. People have been saying, "Oh, they attack people," says Deborah Snyder, her eyes tearing up. But this fan base has saved lives. As much as they wanted something for themselves, they've come together for this amazing cause. You feel so helpless trying to help someone, and you don't know what to do. It's literally life or death. And I felt like we didn't really know where to turn. Rebuilding the story he had always envisioned is what invigorates Snyder most. He can go as deep and dark as he likes. He can say, to hell with DC's official timeline for the characters and let this alternative version of the Justice League story wind up wherever he pleases. He's put Superman in a sleek black suit instead of the iconic blue and red. He's added the Joker, Jared Leto. He's reshot the ending with a hero cameo that will blow hardcore fans' minds. In what may be a divisive move, he's also presenting the movie in the boxy 4x3 format rather than widescreen so that one day it can be watched on IMAX screens. Some may be irritated by seeing Justice League on HBO Max with black bars on either side. Snyder isn't troubled by that. The director is also layering in some deeply personal elements. The movie closes with Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, performed by Alison Crowe, a friend who also sang it at Autumn's funeral. It was Autumn's favorite song. Now it's an elegy to her. Justice League, however anyone else feels about it, is made of the things and people Snyder loves too. When you think about the catharsis of it, if I was a potter, I would have made some pottery to look for some way through this, he says. But I'm a filmmaker, so you get this giant movie. He wants people to love it. If some don't, he's all right with that, with all of it. Whatever comes, he's okay. What is my worth? What am I supposed to do? What am I all about? Zack Snyder is answering Autumn's questions for himself. So, I read that. I'm like, oh my God, this is what I got to talk about today. I mean, there's so much information here. Everything you needed to know about this whole situation is in fact right there for everyone now to know. I think anybody who's wanted this to happen, it is a triumph, I think, for us fans. And I think that it's also, thank God for HBO Max, who saw the value in it. And look, ultimately, I have been an outspoken Man of Steel fan from the very beginning. I love Man of Steel. While I was very disappointed by Batman v Superman. I've often now said after watching the Ultimate Cut, there are still things in it I don't like. I still think it's overstuffed. I would have spent more time with the conflict between Superman and Batman. But the operatic, Wagnerian, and dare I say it because I've been saying it, metal of the entire Zack Snyder vision, I like that I'm getting one man's vision of these characters. I like that we're going to finally have Justice League that Zack Snyder wanted. So, yeah, okay, maybe there's not going to be Justice League 2 or 5 movies, but now Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, which, by the way, the nightmare sequence being tied in, all of that, it's going to feel like one long story. And I, for one, am going to watch it like that, man. I'm going to watch. First time I heard that it's going to debut on HBO Max at, it's what 11 o'clock at night on the 17th on the West Coast or something. That's where it's gonna debut, something like that. Whatever the time is. So it'll be on the 18th, but it starts on the West Coast. I'm taking the day off, yo, and I'm gonna watch Man of Steel. I'm going to watch Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and I'm going to back time in. I'll give myself some time to get dinner or whatever. I'm going to have a nice couple bottles of wine, and I'm going to watch all 4 hours of that shit as soon as it drops. I'm going to play it loud. I don't care. It's going to be late at night. I'm very excited for this. And it's a very interesting story. I think there's a lot to be learned here. I don't want to, I vilified people at the studio. I like studio executives. I do. But the thing is, studio executives are different than filmmakers. And it's been the constant struggle. And really, filmmakers are trying to make good movies, which is what you'd think that studio executives want as well. Studio executives want to make movies that make lots of money. And now more than ever, the kinds of money that we're talking about, gone are the days when the studios would make The Matrix for $65 million in 1999 or something like Hunt for Red October, and they would release it and Matrix would come out and it could make like $200 million bucks, and that's like a huge win. Those days are over. The number is $1 billion. The money being spent, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in marketing and movie making. And it's too bad because there are franchises that have suffered, namely the Star Trek franchise. You don't make a Star Trek movie for $200 million. Ask J.J. Abrams when you meet him, how much did Star Trek Into Darkness really cost? And ask him, do you really think it was smart to make a Star Trek movie for that much money? In Star Trek's whole history in the box office, do you really think spending, $150, $200 million on a Star Trek movie, was that the smartest play? I don't think so. But that's the world we live in. And I think ultimately the story of what happened to Zack Snyder was one where the studio, they fucked him. They fucked him every which way a director can be fucked. And then, to add insult to injury, Zack Snyder had a horrible family tragedy I wouldn't wish on anyone. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But it happened to him, and he had to endure. But you know what? Thanks to HBO Max, but mostly thanks to a group of dedicated fans. Fans who, after all, they believed in a man, they believed in his vision, and they believed in the movies. That's what makes a film successful. That's what the studios want. What studios really want is ultimately the magic of fandom to make their franchises live and soar. And what the studios need is they need creative visionaries that are working on these projects, and they need to let those creative visionaries make what they can make. Now, this isn't to say there shouldn't be studio oversight, but the studio oversight should come before you get on the fucking set. That's the way these things are done. That's the way they've always been done. And to pretend that you don't know what someone's making, the third film that they've made in their superhero, their Man of Steel trilogy, and how can this movie, we need more humor? Really? Really? Now, like, what are we, halfway through shooting? When Berg and Jeff Johns show up on set to what? I mean, I'd love to see, like, do those guys go in and, like, Zach, I can only imagine. Can you imagine, like, Zack Snyder's directing, and someone says, Zach, I could just see Jeff Johns. Jeff Johns, one of the most humorous, funny, warm human beings in the world, is going to tell Zack Snyder how to inject more humor into his film? Really? Come on, man. Anyway, let's see what you all have to say. Oh, speaking of that, I have a letter from Anthony Gonzalez. How you doing, Rob? I just heard your rebroadcast of a certain Man of Steel takedown letter, and I feel compelled to offer a counter. I won't say the writer's name because I'm sure his sentiments are represented by more than simply himself. To begin, I didn't see those parents in Man of Steel actually yelling at the Clarks for saving their son. What they had on their minds was clear. These are small-town folk from a small town in Kansas. My guess is heavily religious, and I don't see anger in them. I see that they're adamant that they may have seen an act of God. There is verisimilitude in that scene for me because I don't doubt small-town folk might react like that. How else would they interpret the story they heard? By the way, Robert, ask your friend Jason Inman. I've heard him on a few instances how he's from Kansas and how Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel is a small-town Kansas-type dad. I believed that scene. Moving on. Man, I did too. I saw it as people that were religious, that thought that their kid witnessed a miracle, and they were following up on it. I completely agree with you. Why doesn't Clark have many friends in Man of Steel? Because, as we know, kids tease each other. Zack showing a young Clark adapt to his senses is actually good character work, in my opinion. I loved it. There's payoff for it later in the film when he is on board Zod's ship and when Zod's suit fails him and he has to rapidly adapt to Earth. But the point is, Kids give Clark a rough time and thought he was a freak because they witnessed his freakouts that were due to his senses and his adaptation to their rapid development in his youth. However, in a later flashback, the bullies were challenging Clark to a fight and pushing him into a fence, and you saw Pete Smalls stick around and help him up. The film doesn't come out and say it, but I get a sense that they became friends. Close? Not necessarily, but friends. Throughout the film, you see Clark as someone lost and searching for answers, for his place in the world and some real identity and purpose. And I get the idea that he'd been digging at him ever since Jonathan Kent showed him his escape pod. Now, when he eventually finds the Kryptonian ship, that's when it happens for him. He comes in contact with Jor-El and says, "I have so many questions." He emerges from that ship changed. The first thing he does is tell Ma Kent, "I found my people." He doesn't go in depth with her, but I get the sense from Henry's acting that right there's a switch in him. He's switched into another gear as a more complete individual, as a force with his true identity. That really happens when he arrives on the military base and he's seen with the handcuffs on. He's strutting with a swagger. It's emanating off of him gloriously. Not arrogance, but with clarity and confidence. The look and smile on his face when he explains to Lois that his crest means hope is everything. I don't believe you got anything like that in the Christopher Reeve Superman, which I also adore. Let me also say, I never really understood people's frustrations with Superman not saving people in the final battle. We all witnessed what he was about in his first fight. My favorite of the fights, in Smallville, when he was fighting against not one but two Zods, of Zod's best-trained soldiers. In the midst of the fight, while doing his best to fight them off, he also saved military personnel in mid-fight. The same military that had been shooting at him minutes earlier. There is no question as to the character of that Kal-El to me. This points us in the direction, to me, into his decision to become a journalist. First off, he tells Ma Kent that he wants to go somewhere he can keep his ear to the ground, where people won't look twice when he wants to go somewhere dangerous. For someone who is willing to save the lives of people who shoot at him, I can surely see him making it a career to put himself in a position where he can find more people that could use his help. He is the hope brought to the planet, and now he gets to work alongside Lois. Another good reason to be at the Daily Planet. Cheers. That comes from Anthony Gonzalez. Thank you, Anthony. A great letter. I wholeheartedly agree with you. Speaking of Star Trek, this letter comes from Chuck. Just Chuck. Hi, Rob. I wanted to write in response to your latest episode regarding Star Trek on the big screen. While I agree that Star Trek is much more philosophical and character-based ethical quandaries that work better in an episodic format, I have to disagree that it can't also work in a feature film format. I never said I disagreed with that. I think it can, but okay. The best TV episodes of Trek are much better than most of the movies. But at its heart, Star Trek The Undiscovered Country is a political thriller dealing with the collapse of a superpower, similar to the collapse of the Soviet Union at the time. I think Star Trek feature films can work best if they were to be more like a sci-fi political thriller, allowing us to have high-stake action set pieces that also ask ethical questions, just like how Captain America, the Winter Soldier, was able to sprinkle in commentary on the surveillance state and how far is too far when spying on the population. Star Trek can be more popular with the mainstream if done right. Growing up in Canada, the series finale of The Next Generation played to a sold-out crowd of 60,000 at the Sky Dome, where the Blue Jays play, with the episode playing on the big screen. In high school, everyone watched Deep Space Nine for the Dominion War and Voyager for Jerry Ryan. I think modern Trek could borrow more from the 90s peak while putting on a modern spin. Thank you for your time, Chuck. Chuck, I agree with you. Look, to me, some of the best movies that I've seen, and I think to myself, Peter Weir's Master and Commander. Obviously, those are based on a series of books about, like Horatio Hornblower, about men at sea. So they're very much the kind of things that Nicholas Meyer looked to make Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. And I completely agree with you. I think Star Trek can be turned into a great big screen franchise, but I wouldn't look toward the villain of the week story to do it. I think the problem with what we've been getting with Star Trek is it's about villains that need to be defeated, which in a Star Trek context is not interesting at all. I've said on this show a million times that Star Trek didn't have villains, it had antagonists. And even when it had antagonists at the end, one of the great examples of that to me was the first season episode Arena, the episode with the Gorn. You know, I've often said to people when I watched that as a little kid, when you see what happened to Cestus 3, which, by the way, is still some of the greatest on location it's one of the great on-location set pieces in all of science fiction television, with the bombs going off, that whole base that was ruined, the colony on Cestus 3. It was great. But at the end of that movie, something that I mean, people laugh at it now because they look at Arena, the giant lizard monster, the Gorn captain has been made fun of on even Kirk and the Gorn captain reunited for a TV commercial. But people forget in that episode, the Metrons are pitting these two disparate species, a lizard, a reptilian species against a humanoid. They're supposed to fight to the death. And when Kirk is going to deliver the killing blow, he doesn't. And he realizes that, you know what? Maybe you thought that your territory was being encroached upon. And that's what makes Star Trek great. And, you know, seeing that episode, and then the Metron shows up and he's like, you know, aren't you going to kill him? That's amazing. We didn't know, scanning your ship or your record banks, that you had a quality of mercy to you. Maybe there's hope for you anyway. And in doing so, Kirk allows the life of the Gorn captain to be spared. And he, of course, gets returned to the Enterprise. Now, if you made a movie out of that, in this day and age, the Gorn, they'd be evil. And the captain would end up killing the Gorn captain at the end of the movie, because that's what they would think audiences would want. But that's not a Star Trek story. You know, what's really interesting is one of the reasons I hated Star Trek 09 is because the villain Nero is the single dumbest villain who has ever appeared in a big-budget science fiction film. Why, you may ask? Because Nero is angry that the Romulan homeworld was destroyed by the destruction, by the supernova of the Hobus star. He goes back in time, basically 100 years. He never stops and thinks, you know what? I'm really angry and pissed off, but I've gone back in time 100 years. If I go back to Romulus and warn the current government that in 100 years this star is going to go nova, and if you don't believe me, look at the ship I brought from the future with all this technology. Might you want to use it? We could save or perhaps stop the nova from happening. But no, he doesn't do that. He's just an angry dude who wants to wreak his vengeance on everyone. He never stops to think, I could solve the very problem that I'm mad about because I've gone back in time. Dumbest villain ever. Star Trek 09 is monumentally, dunderheadedly stupid. And that's one of the reasons I hate it so much. But anyway, didn't you ever watch their version of Back to the Future? I mean, on the Romulan homeworld, they must have had movies about time travel or TV shows. What was the equivalent of Quantum Leap on Romulus? Somebody must have thought about it. It's not like in the Star Trek universe, time travel was something nobody ever discussed. But you never know. This one comes from James Snyder. Greetings, Rob, and exuberant warm wishes to the incomparable Post-Geek singularity. Recently, a member of this classy coterie wrote an amusing letter for an idea for a Batman movie they shared with Ben Affleck. He later discovered many elements of his premise were apparently similar to a Batman film Warner Brothers is making. You wisely cautioned to never share ideas so casually and explained that the reason you don't receive pitches for stories is in order to protect all parties involved from potential wrongdoing. But you also astutely observed that similar ideas can develop independently, especially when thinking in terms of a defined genre and character that is widely known. I was so disappointed in The Rise of Skywalker, I immediately set to work on a 20-page premise that I would have preferred with visuals. I was passionately disappointed, almost like the way you are with current Star Trek, and it only took me a couple of weeks, so I finished it in early to mid-January of 2020. To address why Rey was so preternaturally force-capable, my take included revealing that she was actually a survivor of Order 66, then just a 3-year-old Padawan shuttled to a hospital and put in suspended animation to avoid the scrutiny of the clone troopers. Being in stasis was my workaround for the time differential, and it could also justify why she didn't remember. But surviving Order 66 is now Grogu's backstory. I also thought it was so clever to come up with the idea of having the heroes hijack a Star Destroyer in the second act. You can see where this is going. Days after I put the final touches on my treatment, you broke the Trevorrow script on Robservations. I felt like somebody peeked in my brain, or vice versa. That's a really specific coinkydink. That's how he wrote it, coinkydink. Less surprising, he titled his script The Duel of the Fates after the wonderful John Williams track. That was a title I also considered because it's obviously fitting. However, I ended up going with something more definitive but similar, The Final Duel. Rather than going into what could have been a fun topic for another conversation about the universal subconscious, I'd instead like to focus on the difference between story and storytelling. There's this series you've been discussing recently with a lot of passion and analysis. It centers around a character who is traumatized by grief that lives in a fantasy world to insulate themselves from this pain. If they became more emotionally unstable, they threatened to destroy the world outside of their safe space bubble, and it's up to a uniquely empowered black woman to save the day. But am I referring to WandaVision or Star Trek Discovery Season 3? By the way, when I think of the years you've suffered through bad Trek, it reminds me of a Blade Runner quote. The candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and you have burned so very, very dimly, bad robot. But I digress and paraphrase. Back to plot versus conveyance. Here's another great story. Rebels steal the plans to a superweapon and end up destroying it. I don't think the way I just told that story will impact generations to come or warm the hearts of old farts like me. I guess Star Wars did it better. In fact, Lucas reimagined the telling of this fairy tale so timelessly, it captivates young audiences to this day. But let's look at an even more accomplished storyteller, Shakespeare. Everybody has heard of that guy, even if they aren't very familiar with his work. But a lot of people don't know that only 2 of his plays were original stories. Love's Labour Lost and The Tempest. Othello, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, and all the others were adaptations of pre-existing stories or history plays. Shakespeare is regarded for the way he told stories, not for inventing the stories themselves. It's one thing to come up with a plot, characters, or even the premise of a universe. It's quite another thing to deliver the story to an audience in a way that is compelling, resonant, and memorable. Achieving that requires talent, skill, inspiration, passion, and probably even more importantly, determination and persistence. As the captain of this fine crew of Imagination Knots, Imagination Knots, I love that, Imagination Knots, Imagination Knots. You light up when praising the successes of good storytelling, and you do so with erudition and aplomb. I guess the same could be said when you very rarely trash something. Yes, Kelvinverse, I mean you. But not too long ago, you went a step further. You encouraged, nay, inspired your followers to take a big leap. With the film festival and short story endeavor, you have enticed this community of concept consumers, imagination enthusiasts, and story thinkers to shed the chrysalis of analysis and reaction to instead fly in the rarefied air of storytellers. How exciting! And you've enabled them to do so from the supportive area of Robservations. May they each reach new heights with the wind always at their backs. With best regards and appreciation for sharing my other letters, James Snyderman, formerly Captain McTootie Pants. Well, James, I mean, any letter that's going to sing my praises, I have to say thank you for. But you know what? Your point is well made, and I very much appreciate you writing in. And thank you for the kind words. But really, I mean, as I've always said, I just throw the party. I open the door and invite people in. You know, and the community and the party that you're throwing is only as good as your party guests. So it's been great, and it's been great to build this community, and I've had so much fun doing it. And I plan on doing it, hopefully, for a lot longer. We shall see, unless I get thrown off the platform. If I get deplatformed for being too overly enthusiastic about something, who knows? But I want to thank you for that letter. What a great letter. Here's a good one. Just James writes in, Hi, Rob. Alexandra's letter about her grandmother yesterday hit me like a ton of bricks. You'll probably get a flood of letters like this now, but here's mine. My mother died at the beginning of August last year after a long battle with cancer. Luckily, the skilled nursing facility she'd been in for the last year of her life allowed family to visit, albeit in a full mask, gown, shoe coverings, and for only short periods of time. I brought in a Blu-ray player and a copy of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, a movie she saw in a theater when she was 6 years old and loved. It probably resonated with her because she was raised by a wicked stepmother. Even though she was having a rough time and had a dose of morphine, I think I saw her smile when the dwarves started singing, "Hi-ho, hi-ho, it's off to work we go." We had to leave before the movie was done. I told her we'd be back the next day to finish it, but she died early the next morning. We were so lucky to spend that time with her even during the COVID-19 lockdown. So many don't get that chance. She was a great mom. So many happy memories. Well, Just James, what a great letter. Thank you for sharing that. People watch me read that letter. It was very interesting because the letter started out one way and it went a totally different way. And I was gobsmacked. I mean, I was taken aback. That emotion just wells up in you when you hear a story. There's no defense against it. Here I was live broadcasting, and I just lost it. I was choked up. But I want to thank you for sharing this letter. What a wonderful remembrance. And I hope Alexandra is watching and knows what kind of heartfelt feeling that her letter about Maria has inspired, her grandmother Maria has inspired in everyone here, all the members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. So thank you for that. Paul in Long Beach, our friend Paul, has a theory. Okay, Rob, both of us, having had these types of interactions before, are going to set the scene. It's spring 2019, and Kevin Feige sets up a meeting with Sarah Haley Finn. Being the utter professional, an outline of his newest television show has already been delivered to Miss Finn. It's an informal affair, one that goes through possible casting for said show. Miss Finn says, "Do you want to really mess with your fans, Kevin? You own the X-Men now. Use it, and use it to completely mind fudge your own fans. It would be hilarious if you hired Evan Peters instead. Can you imagine the reaction?" They both sit, laughing, bantering to each other about the possibilities. A couple of minutes pass. Kevin, understanding the genius presented to him, presses a button upon his desk. Just like the old Hollywood trope, a bar emerges from behind his poster collection. Kevin says, "My goodness, Sarah, you're a genius." I really want to believe that's how this occurred. Paul. You know what, Paul? I think that's as good a story as any. I'll believe it. Why not? Why not? This one comes from Ruben Hilbers. Ruben Hilbers. Hey, Rob, I am writing this while Robservations 625 is playing in the background, live. Anyway, on with it. From the novel, A Guy, Two Girls, and a Serial Killer, written by yours truly, this is a conversation between two characters, August and Brenda. I really don't know, but I do think there are three schools of writers. There are the shallow ones. They write to pay the rent, so to speak. All they care about is writing their next blockbuster. She sat across from him. Then there are the preachers. They write a story to make a point, to give an opinion, or to expose something. Let me guess, August said. The last group is the entertainers. No such thing. You see, you make a movie without a point. You're making a movie just to make a movie. Thus, you're only after the money, and that makes you a shallow one. So how do comedies fit into the scheme of yours? Simple. Funny comedies try and show and thus expose how nuts life can be. Not funny comedies fall into the shallow group. He pondered if he should ask about science fiction movies, but decided against it. So, what's the third group? The Chekhovians. Is that an alien race? No, Brenda chuckled. It's a school of writing named after Anton Chekhov, a Russian writer. Aha! The man who wrote The Cherry Orchard. Exactly. Chekhovian writers try and be objective, crawl into the skin of the person they're writing about. They write what they imagine. They try to be realistic, without any moral or lesson in their stories, but they do ask questions. Well, what about the answers? That's what makes them different from the preachers. They don't give any. It's for the reader to figure out. She paused. But enough about me. What do you think? He pondered that for a second and then leaned back. I think books are like coffee. They come in all sorts of flavors, and everybody has his own preferences. Yet by the same token, the writer has to think about his recipe. He paused. How many pages? How much filler and much deep story? And at what point does this start? What point does this start to cause people's stomach trouble? How clean is your conscience? Sorry for the length, but in my opinion, the problem is that modern Trek is being made by the preachers. And as long as they remain in charge, they can reboot Discovery until the cows come home. But I believe it will always remain a bad show until the Chekhovians are once again allowed to hold the reins. Also, sorry about the shameless self-promotion. I just couldn't think of any other way to explain my opinion. Regards, Reuben Hilbers, and that is from his book, A Guy, Two Girls, and a Serial Killer. Can you get that, Reuben? Is it available, or has it not been published yet? I don't know. Okay, this is a good one. This one comes from David Jarecki. I think it's Jarecki. Jaurequi. David Jarecki. Hello, Rob. You might not remember, but quite a while ago, I told you and everyone why Star Trek was so important to me and how it saved my life in a very deep family crisis. It was about my crazy, hoarding mother who almost killed my grandmother and myself in the process, I remember. By now, I regret that I sent this letter, and if I could, I would even ask you to edit it out of the Robservations episode it was included in. Now, why would I ask you to do this? Because I am very disappointed for you, Rob, for the things you said in a recent episode. You said that Ben Shapiro is an imagination connoisseur, a part of our community. And you even said that you would like to work with his movie developing company. Rob, are you feeling all right? Do you even know who Ben Shapiro is and what he stands for? Maybe you should also pay some attention to what kind of people follow him on social media. Lots of them are absolute right-wing nutcases. You know, the kind that would storm the Capitol. Ben Shapiro himself is an arrogant, self-absorbed a-hole, and you are telling us he is part of this community and you want to work for him? Openly endorsing a person like this has consequences. It reflects back on you. Do you want to be associated with Ben Shapiro? I would think twice about that. And this upcoming movie of his you praised so much will certainly not tell the story you might think. You would know that if you had done some research about him and the Daily Wire. They already published an article about how outraged a father of a shooting victim was about how Biden used the anniversary of the Parkland shooting to push gun control. I'm pretty sure you can see where this is going. This movie will certainly be about emotions, about the victims and the horror it caused, but I'm willing to bet that it will push a pro-Second Amendment political agenda. Just have a look at the people commenting on his social media accounts. Right-wing nutcases en masse. And you sit there with a straight face calling Shapiro a part of our community? That was painful to watch. First of all, our community is the Post-Geek singularity. And I would like to point out the people that are in the Post-Geek singularity are imagination connoisseurs. Now, as I've often pointed out, I don't judge imagination connoisseurs. I open the door and I allow imagination connoisseurs to come in. I pointed out that Ben Shapiro on his channel does reviews of Marvel movies, does reviews of Star Wars films. He is clearly a fan of the same materials that we all are. And that's where I said he was an imagination connoisseur. That doesn't mean that imagination connoisseurs have to have the same political views as I do, but there is a baseline of understanding. If I met Ben Shapiro, I've never met Ben Shapiro. I don't necessarily support Ben Shapiro. But if I did meet Ben Shapiro, I could at least talk to him about Star Wars and Star Trek and Marvel Comics. And at least we would have a place where we could understand each other and begin a dialogue. And maybe in the context of sharing our shared interests or our shared love of the MCU, of Star Wars, and of Star Trek, we could have dialogue that would lead to something constructive. When I was speaking about Ben Shapiro, I was speaking about the fact that he's now become, well, he's distributing movies in Hollywood. Now, this is interesting. From my perspective, when another player, especially somebody that has developed his platform over social media, becomes able to do what I want to do, which is not just make my own films using social media to get them financed, but I also want the Burnettwork to be a platform for other creators to launch their material as well. And ultimately, I certainly don't agree with a lot of Ben Shapiro's political views, but he is an imagination connoisseur. And while I don't necessarily think he would be part of the Post-Geek singularity community, as an imagination connoisseur, he and I would have common ground from which to begin a dialogue. And hopefully, based on my opinions, he'd respect me. And based on his opinions of Captain America Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy and the Avengers movies, maybe we could find a place where we could come from together and build some kind of a relationship. But anyway, here is a time-stamped YouTube link, an interview between Shapiro and the BBC. It really highlights what an a-hole Shapiro truly is. If you want to understand what kind of a person he is, you should really watch it. So I just want to ask, this video that you're sending me, this one video, I am supposed to base any opinions I have about Ben Shapiro on this one video. This video, you want to define him, even though, to be honest, I've watched a lot of videos of Ben Shapiro on the web. I know a lot about Ben Shapiro. I know what kind of a person he is, and I certainly don't agree with everything he says. But I was just kicked out of my live chat. I was trying to get back. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but I don't know why suddenly my password is not. I've been kicked out. Anyway, I don't think that means that we have nothing in common. And so, anyway, just observe Ben Shapiro's social media activities. It's all laid out there in plain sight for you to interpret. I'm incredibly disappointed in you, Rob. Not angry. I'm just very sad and disappointed. I thought I found a place where I could feel at home watching your videos and be a part of this community. Sadly, I was wrong. And it's time for me to leave this community and move on, because I don't want to be a part of a community that includes Ben Shapiro. I want no part of this. But by now you must realize how strong I feel about this. I'm sorry that I had to be so blunt in this letter. I wish you good luck with your future projects and your embrace of Ben Shapiro, although I do hope that you change your mind on this. Kind regards, David Jarecki. P.S. Remember, things you say on YouTube reflect back on you and on others that are working with you. This is true. I'm sorry you feel that way, but again, I am a person that says at the end of every one of these shows, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. Clearly, you've listened to Ben Shapiro and rejected him. I've done of Robservations. This is my 626th show. I've talked about Ben Shapiro at length on 2 of those shows. So 624 of these shows were not about Ben Shapiro. And it's unfortunate that I think that you're judging me based on the fact that I think that what Ben Shapiro was doing with his company, The Daily Wire, was interesting from an entertainment industry perspective. But I definitely appreciate your point of view, and I'm glad that you took the time to write in and tell this to me, because for me, it absolutely is something to think about, and that's always a good thing. And I appreciate your candor. And here I'm just trying to get back into YouTube where I can see where where everybody is, because I got kicked out. I hope I'm still broadcasting. I assume I am. Yes, it still says I'm live, so that's good. So I'm back to the live chat. I'm going to put your video in to the video you wanted people to see. So there it is in the live chat. But, I mean, look, what I stand for is this. We have to find ways to speak to one another. We have to. And to banish people or to not do business with them or talk to them or try and find any kind of common ground, where is that going to leave us? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to work together? We have to find ways of working together. And I think, if there's a way that I could find that I can talk to somebody, and I've found, by the way, in my life, anybody who's known me, they've watched me do it. If I go to a foreign country or I go to a place that, if I go to Europe and I know something about, say, a French film or Jerry Anderson or Doctor Who, and I'm in the UK or something, I can always break the ice, I've found, and start a discussion by falling back into my interests as an imagination connoisseur. I have been able my entire life to strike up a conversation with just about anybody, no matter where in the world I am, if we find some common ground through being imagination connoisseurs. Movies, television, music. You can usually start a conversation with just about anyone, even if you're diametrically opposed politically. Now, you might not like Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro is a highly educated guy. I am certainly, as you say, I'm not embracing Ben Shapiro. I only brought up it's interesting that the Daily Wire is going to become a film distributor. And now they've recently announced their partnership with Gina Carano to make films with her. I'm interested because I'm a filmmaker, and having other places to go to find potential financing or distribution is great. Hell, our movie Tango Shalom, maybe they would want to release that. You never know. Now, if they did want to release that and they were successful in releasing it, would that be a bad thing? Tango Shalom is a movie about tolerance, and it's about different religions getting together and supporting one another. If Ben Shapiro's company were to release that, should I say no to them because I disagree with him politically? I don't know. It's an interesting question. What I do know is that this community is about finding common ground with all of us and being respectful about discourse and talking to one another and learning things about one another. You can patently reject what somebody might say or do or think or whatever, but I think that there's still ways to find how we can relate to one another and how we can talk to one another and what we can do together. Sometimes it's going to be hard, but I'm here for that. But I want to thank you for writing in. I mean, you wrote me and said this was going to come in. I guess you're never going to see me having read this letter, but again, I appreciate your criticism. I appreciate your blunt statement of your position, and I like the fact, especially, that you are a man of conviction. You did not hide behind anonymity. You used your name. You said what you wanted to say, and I respect the hell out of you for doing so. And I would hope that anybody who watches this channel knows that I feel the same for anybody who wants to take me to task. And I will read your letter, and I will be respectful. And I think, if anything, that's what this channel's about. So thank you for that. I'm going to jump in and see where we're at with all of you, because I don't know. Where are we? We're going to start with Raymond Verrata. Raymond Verrata is up. Let's see what you got to say here, Raymond. Let's see. Raymond says, I was watching the NASA Perseverance video earlier. Oh my God, did you guys see this? NASA released, they've got video of Perseverance landing on Mars. It's astonishing. It's unbelievable. Raymond says, I was watching the NASA Perseverance video earlier and noticed it was shot in the 4:3 aspect ratio. I thought that aspect ratio has gone away with the age of TV and everything now is in a widescreen format. Why do you think it was shot in this format? That's a pretty good question. I would assume there's probably a reason. I don't know if that is... I think with the landing cameras, those were cameras they had specifically to show, I would assume those were standard def images, which makes them much easier to transmit, that they weren't necessarily in high def, or maybe they were, but they didn't look totally high def, but they were cameras that were lighter and had less probably electronics or whatever. They were only specifically used to show the landing of because they'd be underneath and above. So that's probably what they were designed to do. They were not the main cameras that are probably maybe even in 4K and widescreen. They were only there to show the descent of the ship, and that's probably the only time they're ever going to be used. So they weren't the full cameras. At least that's what I would assume. A Danny boy is here. Hi, Rob. I came across and read the Vanity Fair article of Zack Snyder's Justice League just before you started your stream. I had a few little nitpicks with it that I thought were inaccurate and one-sided take on the toxic Snyder fandom. Not all of the fans were toxic, but we are being slated, not because of a minority group. What's the opposite view on that part of the article? On the whole, though, I thought that this was an endearing and thoughtful piece. Danny, I thought so too. I thought it was a great piece. That's why I wanted to go through the whole thing. But look, of course, not all fans were toxic, and I think it did make it seem it was a little one-sided. Luckily, they brought up the fact that these same fans were organizing into groups that were supporting their raising $500,000 for suicide prevention is an amazing thing. Here's what I would say. Fandom has a problem. Fandom has a problem talking to one another. Fandom has a problem in talking to the world at large. Not all fans, but some of the most vocal fans. There's been a lot of toxicity in fandom over the last 10 years, more than I've ever seen in my whole life. And I think it's something we need to address collectively together. Again, my same advice is if we're all fans, we're all imagination connoisseurs, if we all love these things, I don't think that anybody doesn't, like, we all want to see the Snyder Cut, and we all want it to be great. But the problem is, I work in the entertainment business. I've spent the last 30 years working on movies. The first time I edited a movie was back in 1993, and I've worked as a post-production supervisor since then. And to listen to people come after me and attack me about my beliefs about, no, the Snyder Cut, it exists, or this, that, and we can see it, people can watch it. And when I was coming at it, I'm like, no, what you think it is, it's not. And I come from a position of knowing, but reading that in the article, that it was a 4-hour version with no effects and no music. It probably had temp effects and temp music in it, but it wasn't finished. And that was, especially that was in black and white. That was a unique one for me to hear. I think it proves the fact that, even today, people were trying to explain, they were trying to fansplain to me about how movies are made. And I'm like, okay, but they're belligerent about it. I think we should all, learn. You don't have to be belligerent. If we want to have a conversation, does anybody have to go from 0 to 60 and be like, no, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that and blah, blah, blah. Here's the thing. We all have to just, think about where we're coming from and what we know and what we hope and what we dream and what we want. And frequently, what we want and hope for and dream is not exactly, it doesn't jibe with reality. And so we should be mindful of that and be mindful of each other. But we should always begin from a place that we're all fans. And I think all fans, pretty much, there is something we all have in common. We want our favorite things, whether it's superhero movies or science fiction movies or horror movies or video games. We want these things to be great. We want them to be true to themselves. We want them to be true to the stories they're telling, not some fashion of the week agenda that somebody is pushing in. We want these stories to be genuine. And that's what we want. And if we all know that everything comes from there, we can talk to one another. We need to do more of that. Sheriff Carl says, happy fucking Monday, Rob. Or dude. You seem to have a pretty wide range of musical tastes. I was wondering, what is your favorite concept album? Look, my first response to that would be Kilroy was here. Styx's Kilroy was here. But I'm kidding. What is your favorite concept album? What about it makes it your favorite? I love many, but at the moment I have to pick Amused to Death from Roger Waters. You know what? You know, it might seem cliche, but I have to say, you know what? I might have said Tommy. But I got to go, and it's cliche, is The Wall. Since you brought up Roger Waters. I mean, I loved The Wall. I was one of those kids, I think I got The Wall for my bar mitzvah. Somebody gave it to me for my bar mitzvah as a bar mitzvah gift. And I was one of those, like, 13-year-olds, like, listen, man, you can't just listen to Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. You got to sit down and listen to the whole record. You need to listen to all 4 sides. And you can't just stop with one song. You know, you have to listen to all of it. I was that guy. I loved The Wall. And I loved Alan Parker's visualization of The Wall. I loved it. But then again, you know, I love Tommy, you know, the musical. Ken Russell's the musical too. I like that too. But those are probably, you know, my favorite. Although Operation Mindcrime is pretty fucking good too. So there you go. I've been talking a lot of Queensryche these days. It's amazing. I got really jealous when Dieter on Let's Get Physical Media whips out that Operation Mindcrime box set with the VHS, man. It's good stuff. 200-Watt Studio sends in a super chat and says, sounds like director watchdogs sitting on the set are liked about as much as internal affairs are in a police squad. Yeah, I can't even imagine. Like, here's the thing. Here's the funny thing that no one tells you on a movie set. Okay? You can sit on a movie set all day and you can watch everything that happens and you'll never get a sense of what the finished movie is going to look like. Never. You'll never know. Unless you're at Video Village and you're looking through the video tap on the camera and you can actually see, then you can kind of like, but really nobody knows. You know who the only person who knows what the movie's going to look like when it's over? The director. If the director's good. But the director is the one that has the movie in his head and their head, and each shot is part of that piece. Nobody else on a movie set, especially watchdogs from the studio, have any understanding of what this is all going to look like cut together. So to have watchdogs on a set, it's just like, first of all, I can't believe a more mind-numbing job. And I can't even imagine what it would be like for one of these studio executives. And Jeff Johns was a producer, but even he wasn't like a studio executive. What's he gonna do? Like, I can't imagine you walk up to Zach like, Zach, I don't like the camera here. We need to move the camera. I can't even imagine that. Worst thing in the world. A 200-Watt Studio says, I love the conflict and sacrifice with Bruce, Lois, and Superman. What a great story conflict. Bruce is selfless. I love it. Wouldn't that have been great? I love that idea. And again, it's a take on Batman we've never seen. There's been some romances in the comics with various ladies. He is, after all, a great playboy and a very rich dude. So, yeah. I would like that. 200-Watt Studio says, it makes me smile that he took his cut home. Yes, let me tell you. Filmmakers that are making movies, they always have their cuts on their laptop. They're never far away. If you're a director and you're working on a film, and I as an editor, you're looking at your movie 24/7. You dream about your movie as you're making it. And it's always on your laptop or your computer at home. And when you're not in the edit bay, you're watching it back, making notes about what you're going to do in the edit bay next time you get there. It's all consuming. So, yeah, I like that he took his cut home, too. Ryan Platts sent in a super chat and says, this article is so beautiful. The ending had me in tears. Totally did. It did. It totally did. And it's a win. It's a win. I only hope that I love it as much as I want to love it. Bo Sanders sends in a super chat and says, Robservations, watch for culture news, stay for tips about editing green screen in black and white. Love it. Could have used it a couple of months ago, though. Well, Bo, I'm here for you, pal. Just give me a note, drop me a note or something. My DMs on Twitter are open, so if you ever have a problem, I can help you out. 200 Watt Studio says, someone in the chat mentioned Quibi. If only they could have made the Snyder Cut into 24 10-minute pieces. It might have saved Quibi. Can you imagine? Maybe we should call up Paul Guilfoyle and go through the Guardian of Forever and get Quibi to buy the Snyder Cut. Could happen. Frankie Gouge says, alert, Big Hero 6 characters coming to the MCU. Ooh, I like that. That'd be cool. That's cool. I like that. That's neat. That's a cool thing. I like that. I can't not like that. Super Friend sends in a tip and says, the exact same thing happened to Richard Donner and Superman 2 years ago. He was fired from that movie and was able to come back and do it and finish his vision years later. This is not unprecedented, just very rare. Yeah, but he didn't have everything that he needed. He hadn't shot everything that he needed. But yeah, it's similar. It's similar, but even Richard Donner admits it's not 100% there. So it's very similar. But you're right. It's close. It is close. Armani Martinez sends in a super chat and says, what will Chris Terrio's legacy be? He won the WJ and the Oscar the same year he got his first nomination, but most moviegoers would say he's terrible. No, he'll continue to write. He'll write some good stuff. He will. But you got a point there. Word Balloon, John Suntress is here from the Word Balloon podcast. If you don't listen to the Word Balloon podcast, it's one of my favorite podcasts on the interwebs. John is always interviewing very interesting people. John says, if you have time, let's do a podcast video talk about the Snyder DC films before and after jail airs on HBO Max. We can finally talk about something we disagree about. We're usually in agreement. I'm not feeling the metal in a good way. How can you not feel the metal in a good way? It's metal, man. Metal. I think you should feel it. But I understand. Let's talk about it. That's great. Praxium became a member of the channel. Christian Grajewski became a member. Well, thank you, the two of you. Chosen Vader Karate, Silver Slytherin Karate became a member. Wow, that's a mouthful. What's the difference between Chosen Vader Karate and Silver Slytherin Karate? I don't know. Jeff Yerke and Mrs. Y, one of our favorite members of the Post-Geek Singularity, the man who loves his wife more than, I don't know anyone who loves their wife more than Jeff Yerke does, because he never goes anywhere, even on a chat board, without her. Jeff Yerke says, hi, Rob. Finally bit the bullet and watched Tenet Saturday night. We'd been careful not to read anything about the film so as to let me just take it in. We've been huge Nolan fans since day one, but I'm keenly aware of his problems as a storyteller. Notably, his problems with Act 3 in his films. Tenet left me cool. Mrs. Y and I were not engaged, which is why you got engaged in the first place. And the story felt like it was a smorgasbord of Nolan's prior tropes with a new stir-fry. I'd have to give it 2.5 stars out of 5. Live long and prosper. The Yerk Man. That is exactly correct. I feel the same way, man. I feel the same way. Oh, you know what? There's a, I don't want to miss a super chat. Happy Console Gamer says, hey, Rob, thanks for the recommendation for the movie All That Jazz. Watched it last night, and it blew me away. Powerful on so many levels. Happy Console Gamer, my man. All That Jazz is one of my favorite. By the way, it's good to see you again. Well, I don't see you, but you know what I mean. That movie is one of my top 10 all-time favorite movies. I saw it. My family went and saw it, and I was utterly, in 79 when it opened, I was blown away. It was the first time I really noticed editing. And not just in the opening, on Broadway opening, but the whole movie. The way it intercut between the past and the present and the future. Well, kind of the future. But it's an amazing, amazing film. I'm glad it blew you away. It's one of my favorite films of all time. I hear it's one of David Fincher's favorite films of all time as well. What a great film. What a great, great film All That Jazz is. I'm glad you liked it. We're going to watch it on Whining About Movies. I don't know if we're going to watch it tonight because I don't think we have time. I know Elizabeth is still in school, so I don't know. We might have to push it till tomorrow. I don't know. Justin Toner, our own Justin Toner, says, "Hi, Rob. Thanks for sharing the article today. Great reading. After yesterday's Let's Get Physical Media, I bought the Raid Collection, a.k.a. the Rad Blu-ray set. Both movies for only $13 on Amazon. I couldn't let you and Dieter down. Cheers." Well, Justin, for those of you who don't know, the Raid, or as I like to say, the Rad, dude, and the Rad 2, even radder, even though it's the Raid and the Raid 2 Barrendal, are, if you haven't seen the Raid movies and you like action films, what are you waiting for? You have to like martial arts movies. You got to buy into it. But man, I'm telling you. By the way, the Raid 2 has some amazing... There's a fight in moving cars. That's all I can say. I don't mean I don't mean like the cars are fighting. I mean people are in the cars fighting from one car to another. You just have to see it. You just have to see it. Marksman sends in a super chat and says, "Thank you, Rob, for being truly inclusive. I always feel welcomed here. Well, I hope I'm never any other way. I believe in inclusivity, true inclusivity, not just token inclusivity. It's like, let's come on in here. Let's sit down. Let's talk face to face about whatever you want to talk about. I mean, look, man, here's our commonalities. You know what we always have to remember? Here's our commonalities. There's only one of each of us on this planet. One. That's it. I know, okay, you got twins, but even twins aren't totally the same. You got different fingerprints, right? There's only one of each of us on this planet. We're all different. All of us. We all want different things. We all like different things. We all need to eat. We all need to find a place to sleep. So we have commonalities at the very basic level that we should all be like, you know, let's see, you're two people that hate each other. You're the last people left on Earth. There was a Twilight Zone episode about this called Two. Elizabeth Montgomery was in it. So you're on the planet, and you're the last two people on Earth, and you hate each other. You have a better chance of survival figuring out a way to work together to survive. So think about that. All the lessons in life are in The Godfather and The Twilight Zone. All you have to do is go watch them. Robert Conrad. Whenever I see Robert Conrad, I either think The Wild Wild West, or I think I want to have a battery on my shoulder and dare you to knock it off. I know, that dates me horribly, but what can I say? Robert Conrad says, "Well said, Rob. We have to find ways to work together, or we will just keep pushing each other further and further away, creating a greater divide." It's absolutely true. To me, that's just counterproductive. The sooner we can stop doing that, the better off we're going to be. So why don't we stop doing that? 200 Watt Studio says, "The thing that the intolerant hate is when you show them grace." I agree. I agree. And I think that's the only way to be. Danny Boy. Danny Boy is here again. I'm sorry, I have to sing that. Just to say, Rob, this has been an uplifting stream for me, especially with the main topic. If you remember, on one of your recent Hot Toys streams, I mentioned the unexpected passing of my partner's son, to whom I've regarded as if he was my own. I've been emotionally struggling to deal with his loss. Hence, I can really understand the grief the Snyders went through and how they've tried to move forward. I think now I can do the same, even if it is a little step and day at a time. Great stream, Rob, and thank you. You know what? Now I feel bad about singing Danny Boy when I see your name. But listen, I'm glad if this show can offer any solace. You know, if there's one thing that I have always wanted this show to do, it is that it should be fun to watch. That's what I mean. The whole point is to be like, I want to have a show where it's going to be like going to a science fiction convention, and I'm going to meet somebody I don't know, and we're going to have like a 5-hour conversation about The Prisoner. That actually happened to me when I first went to the first 42nd World Science Fiction Convention in Anaheim. Between my junior and senior year in high school, I went on a 2-week road trip with a buddy of mine in high school to go to the 42nd World Science Fiction Convention. And as long as the channel can be that for you, that's the best thing. That's the best compliment that you can give me. So I appreciate that, and I'm glad that you have found some solace. Yeah. And Robert Conrad became a member, so thank you for that. Richard sends in a tip and says, regardless of the definition standard, a 4:3 image would have the same pixels per centimeter as a 16:9 one, yes, but less pixels overall. Outside the consumer sector, it makes economical sense to use that ratio, which is why it's used in the medical sector. Well, that makes total sense to me. Absolutely. Yeah. I can see that. I can see that. That's probably why they did it. Sheriff Carl says, damn, Rob, you are one measured motherfucker. When I hear you talk about how you can find common ground with others you normally don't agree when I shout at the TV. Others you don't normally agree with, I shout at the TV. This dude fucking gets it. You're a thoughtful young man and a wise motherfucker. Keep rocking. Dude, we will always rock. Or as Jack Black would say, raise your goblet of rock. In School of Rock, one of my favorite comedies. When he puts on Stevie Nicks to talk to Joan Cusack, I lose my shit every time. It's great. John Suntress is back. John Suntress says, speaking of Ben Shapiro, how much do you know about another newcomer to backing genre fiction, Legion M? As a matter of fact, I was talking to David Baxter from Legion M last night on our Inglorious Trexperts Clubhouse stream. It's very funny that the last two times I've seen David, I've known David for years. The last two times I've seen David was because I was at Shake Shack with the Inglorious Trexperts in West Hollywood, where we record it before the pandemic. And then last night he was in our Clubhouse stream, and that was fun to see him. I know a lot about Legion M. Have they actually made anything yet? I question their legitimacy. It's kept me from having them back on my show. Yeah, I mean, I think they're getting there. You know, I think they're getting involved with things. They're being more and more responsible for films. I would wonder about that too. I do wonder about that. You know, they keep raising money, but they are involved in projects. I just don't know how that all works yet. But you're right. You're right. Although I like David Baxter, and I don't think he would get involved in something that wasn't legit. So we'll see where they go, though. Brandon Sheehy says, Rob, I like that Marvel introduced their first black female superhero with little fanfare. Everybody was more consumed in Monica's surprisingly compelling character journey rather than simply ticking a diversity box, characters and story before your agenda. Brendan, I am 100% with you, sir. That is exactly what I believe, and I think they've done a great job. And Monica Rambeau, she was the Captain Marvel, a black Captain Marvel, proud black and Captain Marvel way before Carol Danvers took over that. So it's good to see her being restored to her rightful place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But listen, what I love about Marvel is they aren't just ticking some diversity box. They're going back into their comics, in the case of Monica Rambeau, over, basically 40 years, and they're bringing her forward, and in a beautiful way. I mean, the fact that we met her already as a little girl in Captain Marvel. I just love the way they play with continuity, not play with it, but use it in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is awesome. It is awesome. Richard says, so bad people follow Shapiro and he lost a debate on the BBC. Are we all being measured by that standard? I would hope not, Richard. I mean, there's things that if I was measured by one thing, I would never get anywhere in life. I mean, it's a continuum. You win some, you lose some. I find that the best way to be most of the time is bemused. You have to look at at human existence with a sort of bemused gaze, because bemused means you can love things, you can find humor in things, you can also find some things. Well, let's not do that again. But yeah, I agree. That's why it's scary to me that I mean, on one hand, people just hate Ben Shapiro, but he's a highly educated man. He's an Orthodox Jew. He's a good father. Well, I don't know if he's a good father. He seems to be. He cares about his wife and kids a lot. He has convictions he believes in, and he stands up and he gets out. Whether you agree with him or not, that man is talking, and you know where he's coming from, and you know what his beliefs are. And by the way, he's suffered a lot of anti-Semitic attacks from people. I mean, verbal attacks, not physical attacks. But everybody, we live in strange times. So, yeah. Am I a Ben Shapiro sycophant? No. Do I watch Ben Shapiro videos? Occasionally. I watch all kinds of videos from people I agree or don't agree with because I learn. Like I anything that's interesting, especially Ben Shapiro does really interesting interviews with people. I'll watch them. T. Goslin became a member. Thanks, T. Goslin. Thanks for becoming a member. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, screw Justice for Han. We should be screaming, screw hashtag Justice for Han. We should be screaming Justice for Sparky. I know, man. They straight up killed a dog. But I was talking to John Campea, and this was brought up on the John Campea show. Agatha Harkness has her own theme song. That means, doesn't it, that if Wanda is doing all of this, did not Wanda create Agatha Harkness's theme song? Is not Agatha Harkness the villain of this piece, which means she's also a creation of Wanda and the Hex? So is Agatha Harkness even really there? Or is she a part of the show? She has her own theme song. What does that mean? I don't know. Could mean nothing. Could mean maybe she's not even really there either. You don't know. Evan Newman says, I watched Sunshine for the very first time last night. What a great movie. I like Sunshine a lot. And what a score. Forgot Alex Garland wrote it. Yes, he did. I was thinking of watching The Beach next since it was an earlier Garland-Boyd team-up. If you've seen The Beach, do you have any thoughts on it? I have seen The Beach. I liked The Beach. I know it's based on, I don't know if he wrote the novel or not, but it's not perfect. But it's certainly interesting. I mean, it's a compelling movie to watch. You won't walk away thinking, well, that sucked. It really raises some really interesting questions. John is here. John says, I had to buy the Blu-ray of All That Jazz as I could not find it anywhere to stream. Better be with the $40, the Criterion Collection. I'm taking your word for it. I'm sure it'll be great. Bruh. It's a Criterion Blu-ray. How could it not be? It's great. It's great. There's so much good stuff on that disc. And first of all, you get to talk to, well, you don't get to talk to him. You get to see Bob Fosse talking. You're going to love it. Report back. I'll tell you what, if you don't like it, I will buy that disc from you and I will give it away on this show. How about that? I'll pay you back if you don't like it. I'll give it away. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Matthew Bertram says, hey, Rob, I wanted to know how worried you are that the WB HBO Max situation hasn't already doomed Denis Villeneuve being able to finish his Dune story. Well, from what I understand, which I've said on the show, they plan on making 3 Dune movies. They're going to make Dune, Dune Prophet, and then Dune Messiah, which would take us all the way through Paul Atreides' let's not call it uplifting life story. And I think, look, we're getting out of this pandemic. I mean, in a way, cases are going down. Things are getting better. So I'm hoping that, they're supposed to open Dune in October, I think. Maybe things are looking up and that people are going to want to go back to the movies and people are going to want to go back and see startling science fiction giant visions like Dune. I don't know if it's doomed it or not, but I would hope not. That would suck. I would not like that at all. So I think I hope springs eternal. I think Dune will be its own reward. Well, listen, everyone. This concludes Robservations episode number 626. My God, I can't believe it. I want to thank all of you for being here and supporting this channel via super chats and tips and also letters. Writing your letters. If you want to write a letter to this channel, you can. You can go to the Burnettwork.net website, and the Burnettwork.net website is kind of like a constant party. It's open 24/7. You can go there and hang out and fill your mind with all of your fellow Imagination Connoisseurs' hopes, dreams, desires. I'm telling you, it's an endless suck of great thoughts and materials, and you will get sucked in. I guarantee it. You'll get sucked in if you go there. Not unlike a Sarlacc pit, but it will not take 1,000 years to digest you, which is always a good thing. Anyway, I want to thank my moderating staff, beginning with Mike Bodden and, of course, the Richard. I don't know who's here today, but I want to thank Bunyan Snipe. Greg Smith is here. Robert Pariso is here. Josh Rosowskis is here. Oh, my God, it's a full house. It's amazing. I want to thank my moderating staff. They make the community what it is, so thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining this, and I want to say to Greg Smith, bruh, have you seen that Hot Toys 2-pack with old Boba Fett out of his armor and the Boba Fett armor? It's one of the greatest head sculpts I've ever seen. Just saying. That's personal and confidential. But anyway, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everyone, have a better day.